Hello, fellow Sapiens, and welcome back to Midnight Sapien. Whether you're curling beneath the blankets after a long day, wandering softly through your thoughts on a night drive, or simply filling the quiet with curiosity, this space is yours. Because tonight, we're sinking into the lost heartbeat of the Mesozoic world, a time before mammals, before flowers, before us. This is slow science, told gently, for curious minds and heavy eyes. It's an untold story from a 186 million year stretch of deep time, written in thunder, ash, and sunlight. But it begins not with dinosaurs, but with ruin. And, if you're the kind of mind that drifts toward extinct empires, ancient skies, and slow, unfolding wonder, consider tapping like and subscribe. It really helps this kind of quiet storytelling reach more wandering sapiens like you. Oh, and where are you listening from? What time is it for you? Right now, if you feel like sharing, I'd love to know in the comments below, as a soft reminder that we're all drifting through time together. Also, feel free to fall asleep. Timestamps are in the description if you ever want to return. Now, let's begin with the death of forests and the rise of giants. The silence came after the screams. Not human screams, of course, but the groaning collapse of entire reef systems, the sharp silencing of trilobites, the quiet death of forests that once stretched across the supercontinent of Pangaea. Some extinctions are swift. This one, what we now call the Permian Triassic extinction event, was a slow and brutal erasure. It lasted perhaps 60,000 years, possibly more. Time, even here, is difficult to grasp. But by the end of it, the Earth was nearly still. Around 252 million years ago, something shook the very foundations of life, not with a single blow, but with a cascade of catastrophes. Volcanoes of unimaginable scale tore open the crust in what is now Siberia. These were not local eruptions, but continent-sized wounds. For nearly a million years, the Siberian traps spilled lava, ash, and toxic gases into the air. Carbon dioxide levels surged. Oceans turned anoxic. Hydrogen sulfide poisoned the air and sea alike. Acid rain fell on what remained of the land. We do not know the full sequence of what happened. The fossil record is clear only in its absences. Roughly 90% of all marine species vanished. 70% of land-dwelling vertebrates disappeared. The insects fared little better. This was the most devastating extinction in Earth's history, far surpassing the one that would later end the age of the dinosaurs. And yet, life did not end. It retreated. It cracked. It whispered. Imagine standing on that wounded Earth in the earliest days of the Triassic period. The sky choked with haze. The heat, oppressive and strange. Temperatures may have soared above 50 degrees Celsius in the interiors of the continent. The forests, where they remained, were reduced to sparse patches. In many places, ferns and small lycopods were all that grew. Vast stretches of land were barren, scoured clean by the chemical chaos that had passed through. The oceans were worse. Once rich reefs had collapsed into lifeless carbonate mounds. Shellfish, corals, ammonoids, all had been pushed to the brink. Only a few hardy lineages clung to existence. The waters were warm, sluggish, and low in oxygen. This was not the vibrant blue of the modern seas. It was a darker, stranger realm. The world had entered what some scientists call the coal gap. For several million years after the extinction, there is no trace of coal formation in the rock record. No vast swamp forests, no peat, nothing to press into carbon. It was as if the Earth had forgotten how to grow thick with life. But even here, something persisted. Tiny creatures like Lystrosaurus, a tusked, barrel-bodied synapsid, emerged as unlikely survivors. They did not rule with strength or cunning, but with resilience. Fossils of Lystrosaurus have been found across what are now Africa, India, and Antarctica. Their fossils appear in astonishing abundance. In some places, nearly 90% of vertebrate remains belong to them. What allowed them to survive when so many others perished? The evidence is thin, but suggests a combination of factors: burrowing behavior, a generalist diet, perhaps a tolerance for high levels of carbon dioxide. We can only infer. The bones do not speak, but they remain. They tell us, in their stillness, that survival is not always a matter of superiority. Sometimes, it is the quiet persistence of the ordinary that carries life forward. But even as Lystrosaurus trudged across the broken continents, the planet remained deeply unstable. The air was not just hot, but strange. Carbon dioxide levels may have exceeded 8 times those of today. Oxygen, once abundant, dipped to dangerous lows. This imbalance sculpted the atmosphere into something alien and shaped which creatures could breathe. What does survival mean when the very sky burns your lungs? The Triassic world was not a calm recovery. It was a fever dream of a planet still reeling. Heat waves swept Pangaea's interiors. Rain patterns shifted or vanished entirely. In fossil soils, paleosols, there are signs of drought, hardened layers, root traces cut short, as if plants could grow no farther. Even near ancient rivers, vegetation was sparse and stunted. Forests that had sheltered amphibians and reptiles stood in tatters. Glossopterid trees of the Permian disappeared entirely. Opportunistic ferns, seed ferns, and gymnosperms slowly filled the vacuum. But for millions of years, Earth was a scrubby, steppe-like patchwork of survival. Predator-prey relationships collapsed. With ecosystems simplified, food chains shortened dramatically. Generalists thrived. Fast reproduction, short lifespans, burrowing these became survival tools. Large carnivores dwindled or vanished. The top of the food web was a perilous place. Life's innovation started from the bottom, reshaping balance over time. Signs of recovery emerged. In South China, fish repopulated shallow seas. Bivalves and ammonoids returned, though diminished. The oceans pulsed again. On land, archosauriforms, early crocodile, and dinosaur relatives appeared in the record. They weren't dominant yet, but they were present, a glimpse of future rulers. Among these was Proterosuchus, a semi-aquatic reptile with a long snout and slender body. Found just above the extinction horizon, its fossils are modest, its role unclear. Yet its presence is a marker, a thread, a reminder that history can hinge on sparse evidence and single bones. The Earth's surface then would feel familiar only in outline, not mood. No birdsong, no mammals, no grass or flowers. Those would come much later. This was a planet of scattered resilience and slow beginnings. Our understanding is built on luck. The early Triassic fossil record is sparse. Many regions hold no evidence, either buried too deeply or because life was scarce. Gaps are vast, silences deep. Yet every find a jawbone, a layer of ash, a fern spore adds a piece to the puzzle. We build this picture carefully, slowly. A puzzle with most of its pieces missing, yet enough to see a faint shape emerging. Even so, one truth stands out. Life was trying again. Not with confidence, but with necessity. In the long, dark recovery after the greatest extinction, biology crept forward, inch by inch, rewriting the future. There is a strange beauty in these long silences. Between one extinction and the next, the Earth breathes slowly. Its pulse reduced, but not gone. From the highlands of ancient Gondwana to the shallow edges of the Tethys Sea, the Triassic world begins, not with an explosion of colour and abundance, but with a whisper, a tentative step forward into biological possibility. And so the question lingers: what kind of world is born when nearly everything has died? The answer, as best we can tell, is a world that reimagines the rules. The vacuum left by the Permian extinction forced evolutionary paths to branch in unexpected ways. Strange creatures emerged. Some of them would disappear as quickly as they came. Others would set the stage for dynasties still to come. Among these were the early Archosaurs. They were not yet the thunderous dinosaurs of later ages. Instead, they were small to mid-sized, lightly built, and diverse in form. Some ran on 2 legs, others on 4. Some lurked in rivers. Others stalked the sparse underbrush of newly forming forests. They were experimenters, not yet rulers. But their time would come. This transitional world also gave rise to curious holdovers from the past. In parts of what is now Russia and South Africa, Dicynodonts, relatives of the earlier synapsids, continued to survive. Their appearance was neither graceful nor fearsome. They resembled pig-sized animals with beaked mouths and tusks. Herbivores adapted to low-browse vegetation. They likely travelled in herds and dug into dry soils in search of food. They were reminders that survival often belongs to the adaptable, not the dominant. And overhead, the skies were empty. No birds yet. No buzzing bees or flowering plants below. The air carried the scent of volcanic soil, the dust of inland deserts, and the heat rising off rocky plains. It is likely that the sun glared more harshly, unfiltered by dense forest canopies. Winds moved across landscapes without song. The world felt unfinished. Yet the geological evidence tells us that it was precisely here, in this desolation, that ecosystems slowly began to restitch themselves. The earliest signs of complex food webs began reappearing in marine settings. Burrowing organisms returned to the ocean floor. Crinoids and echinoderms began to populate the shallows once again. Coral reefs, absent for millions of years, would take longer to return. But the process had begun. Some researchers believe the early Triassic may have witnessed one of the hottest sustained climates in Earth's history. Equatorial regions may have been nearly uninhabitable, yet even there, in the blistering heat, life tried. From this fragile beginning would rise all the grandeur of the Mesozoic. But at this point in time, that grandeur was not guaranteed. It was not even imaginable. No fossil from the early Triassic speaks of dominance. They speak instead of endurance, of persistence without certainty. And perhaps that is the most profound story of all. That after the end of all things, life did not need permission to begin again. It simply did. Even in the absence of colour, even without promise, even when the earth had seemingly forgotten how to dream. Beginnings do not always come with clarity. Sometimes they arrive in fragments, in contradictions, in a slow rhythm that feels more like drift than progress. How do we understand an era where no creature leads evolution's dance? The early Triassic was such a world, a planet scarred and unhealed. For nearly 10 million years, Earth drifted through biological limbo. The extinction had scrubbed ecosystems so thoroughly that no group could yet dominate. Predator-prey cycles, forests and grazers, climate and migration were broken. In their place stood something raw, experimental. It was not chaos. Life returned, but unevenly, in fits and starts. Across what is now South Africa, Russia, and China, fossils show strange assemblages, species colliding in unfamiliar ways. This was no balanced ecosystem, but a patchwork, a testbed for survival. Synapsids, rulers of the Permian, lingered. Lystrosaurus spread widely, thriving briefly, but by the mid-Triassic they thinned out. Smaller, sharper-toothed forms rose. Cynodonts, ancestors of mammals, showed a mix of reptilian and mammalian traits. Whisker pits, differentiated teeth, complex jaws. Their story had resumed, but transformation was incomplete. Archosauriforms also emerged, not yet dinosaurs or crocodiles, but something between. Euparkeria, from South Africa, is a tantalizing example. Possibly bipedal, agile, and suited to hunting small prey, it moved swiftly through scrub. Whether it stalked at dusk or day is unknown, but it signaled an evolutionary push towards speed and endurance. Other archosaurs were brutes. Erythrosuchus, with massive skulls and heavy bodies, dominated briefly as apex predators. Their reign was local and temporary. No species held global control. Rivers and lakes hosted their own survivors. Giant amphibians thrived in aquatic niches. Temnospondyls, broad-headed predators, lurched through muddy channels. Their fossils, scattered across Pangaea, show remarkable resilience. Though destined to decline, they endured this unstable world. Still, No clear victor appeared. Fossil layers tell a story of flux, communities lasting a few million years before vanishing. Dominant groups in one region were replaced in another. Tectonic activity, scorching temperatures, and erratic rainfall reshaped environments faster than evolution could stabilize them. Adaptability mattered more than power. Agility outweighed strength. Some regions were swampy floodplains, lush and green. Others were dry, windswept wastelands. Even within a single continent, contrasts were stark. What thrived in one place withered in another. Global dominance was impossible. Instead, life spread sideways, improvising. It branched into unusual directions, diversifying cautiously. This was a world in recovery, but not yet reborn. Evolution was searching for balance, and it would take millions of years more for the rules to shift again. To call this era balanced would be misleading. It was not balance that defined it, but instability prolonged. The fossil record does not describe a single dominant predator stalking its prey across a stable biome. Instead, it reveals scattered regions, each with its own caste of temporary champions. The rules were local. What worked in one basin failed in the next. Evolution, in this time, did not build empires. It built enclaves. And so we begin to ask, what does power even mean in a world where no creature holds it for long? In the western regions of what is now China, a group of creatures known as poposauroids began to appear. Related to Archosaurs, these oddities defy simple categorization. Some of them walked on two legs. Others, like Shuvosaurus, resembled ostrich-like animals with toothless beaks, but were in fact closer to crocodile relatives than to birds or dinosaurs. These strange hybrids of form are reminders that the evolutionary paths we take for granted, reptile or mammal, predator or herbivore, were not yet firmly drawn. One of the defining qualities of this era was convergence. Across multiple lineages, we see the same traits evolving independently. Upright posture, grasping limbs, serrated teeth. It is as if the planet, deprived of its former icons, began running parallel experiments to solve the same problems. Each lineage trying to answer the question of how to move, how to eat, how to last. Even in the seas, dominance was an open question. Though many marine reptiles would rise to power in the Jurassic and Cretaceous, their roots trace back to this chaotic time. Creatures like Nothosaurus and Pistosaurus appear in the mid-Triassic fossil beds of Europe and China. Semi-aquatic, long-necked, with limbs halfway between paddles and legs, they explored the margins between land and sea. Not yet built for deep dives, they likely hunted fish and soft-bodied prey in coastal shallows. Their rise would be slow, but their presence here is important. It tells us that the water, too, was restless with possibility. The Triassic Earth was warmer than today. There were no polar ice caps. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels remained high for millions of years after the Permian event. Some estimates place average global temperatures as much as 6 to 8 degrees Celsius above present norms. Inland regions may have been scorching. Rainfall patterns were irregular, with long dry seasons followed by sudden, intense storms. This kind of climate selects for traits we still struggle to define: heat tolerance, water efficiency, behavioral plasticity. Some organisms may have survived simply because they did less, moved less, needed less. In this crucible of heat and flux, the very shape of ecosystems began to shift. Food webs were flatter. Detritivores played larger roles. Scavengers outnumbered apex predators in many fossil sites. It was not yet an age of giants. It was an age of survivors. Some paleontologists describe this period as an evolutionary bottleneck. Others prefer to call it a faunal reshuffling. Both phrases carry truth. In the silence left by extinction, biology wandered, and the Earth watched. Even now, with satellite eyes and digital tools, we struggle to recreate what these environments truly felt like. The evidence survives in stone: impressions of roots, ripple marks in ancient floodplains, half-crushed skulls of species that appear once and never again. Each fossil is a sentence in a language we are still learning to read. And in the layers that follow the Permian extinction, the grammar is unstable. Sentences begin, but do not finish. Patterns emerge, only to dissolve. This is not a story of climax. It is a story of restlessness. In the midst of it, one lineage continued to press forward. Archosaurs, though not yet dominant, were beginning to diversify with purpose. Some remained low and heavy, armored with bony plates. Others grew long-limbed and agile, leaning into speed and efficiency. It is here, in these middle Triassic strata, that we begin to see forms that whisper of future tyrants. Not the thunder of Tyrannosaurus rex, but the light-footed precursors. Small, nimble, patient, but it is important not to project the future backward. These early archosaurs did not yet rule the land. They coexisted with amphibians and synapsids in a scattered and temporary balance. For every step forward, there were collapses, local droughts, volcanic disruptions. There is no clean ascent in this part of the Mesozoic, no linear path from ruin to reign. Instead, we find a jostling crowd of species, each trying, failing, adapting, or vanishing. And that, in itself, is a kind of wonder. A world where nothing holds the crown for long becomes a stage for unfiltered creativity. Insects, too, played their part. Beetles, one of the oldest lineages still living today, had already diversified. Some fed on detritus, others burrowed through bark and decaying wood. Their presence tells us there were enough plants, enough decay, enough complexity to support such roles. These are not the headliners of natural history, but they form the scaffolding of ecosystems. The plants, though still recovering, were also shifting. Conifers began to spread, especially in upland and temperate areas. Seed ferns lingered in lowlands. Horsetails and cycads dotted the margins of wetlands. True flowering plants had not yet evolved, but the building blocks of later forests were being assembled, slowly, one pollen grain at a time. And beneath all of it, tectonics continued to reshape the supercontinent of Pangaea. Fault lines pulled, crumpled, and fractured the land. Sea levels rose and fell. Continental interiors remained dry and harsh. Coastlines became increasingly complex. With every geological breath, new opportunities arose. And with every shift, a different creature was given a fleeting chance. The Earth, it seems, was not rushing. It was still composing the first notes of a new song. And as this long silence stretched on, something subtle began to change. Not in the dominance of a single species, but in the conditions that would eventually allow such dominance to emerge. The oxygen levels, once dangerously low, began to recover. Forests, patchy though they were, grew taller. The climate stabilized in brief pulses, long enough for creatures to settle into longer lifespans and slower metabolisms. Somewhere in this delicate balance, the idea of dominance as a biological strategy was beginning to gestate. But it had not yet arrived. For now, the Triassic remained a world of competitors without rulers, of frameworks without hierarchy, of countless whispers without a single voice to command them. And perhaps, in that open field of possibility, evolution became its most honest self. And while the field of possibility remained wide, somewhere within it, a new shape began to gather momentum. What allowed the Archosaurs to rise when so many others remained locked in fragile equilibrium? Their name, Archosaur, means ruling reptile. But rulership, in this case, did not arrive through conquest. Not at first. Their rise was not a single moment of dominance, but an accumulation of small, decisive advantages. Their eventual supremacy, which would last for more than 150 million years, began quietly. It was a story written in bones, in posture, and in lungs, a slow build of evolutionary momentum rather than a sudden takeover. In the early and middle Triassic, Archosaurs were not yet titans. They were part of the background, a group of reptiles among many others struggling to adapt in a volatile, recovering world. They did not yet tower over landscapes or inspire awe in their prey. But they were different, and in an environment where survival often hinged on even the smallest edge, that difference mattered. One of their greatest advantages lay in posture. Many reptiles of the time had limbs sprawled to the sides, forcing them to swing their bodies in a side-to-side motion as they walked or ran. These animals were tied to the ground, dragging their bellies, moving with limited stamina. Archosaurs changed the equation. Their legs were positioned beneath their bodies, allowing them to hold themselves higher and stride forward with power and efficiency. They could travel long distances, cross the vast interior deserts of Pangaea, follow prey across shifting landscapes, and migrate with seasonal rainfall patterns. Unlike their lumbering contemporaries, they were built to keep going. They were not merely survivors of ambushes or short chases, they were long-distance hunters and travelers. Respiration gave them another edge. Fossil evidence shows that some archosaurs had postcranial pneumaticity, air-filled cavities within their bones. These cavities hint at the evolution of flow-through lungs, an advanced respiratory system now seen in modern birds. Instead of the simple in and out breathing we use, these lungs allowed air to pass through the respiratory system in one continuous direction, maximizing oxygen intake. It enabled archosaurs to remain active while others faltered, granting them endurance that few other animals of the time could match. Their bones reveal a third secret: speed of growth. Under a microscope, fossilized bone sections show fibrolamellar bone, a tissue type found in fast-growing, warm-blooded animals. Rapid growth meant they could reach maturity quickly, reproduce sooner, and recover population numbers after local die-offs. In an unstable world, where ecosystems collapsed and rebuilt over and over again, this was a critical advantage. These three traits, upright posture, advanced lungs, and fast growth, did not emerge all at once, nor were they uniform across every species. They evolved unevenly, scattered across the Archosaur family tree. But together, they created a blueprint for success. Evolution was selecting for animals that could move farther, breathe better, and grow faster than their competition. Within this lineage, a major divergence occurred. The Archosaurs split into two great branches: the Pseudosutians, ancestors of crocodiles, and the Ornithodorans, ancestors of dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and eventually birds. At this point in time, they didn't look wildly different. Both were small-bodied, long-legged, and sharp-toothed. Both were upright and agile. But their evolutionary paths would lead to very different futures. The Pseudosutians largely remained tied to watery environments. Some became heavily armoured, with thick dermal plates covering their backs and tails. Others grew massive skulls lined with blade-like teeth, adapting for short, explosive ambushes. Some, like the heavily built Desmatosuchus, evolved spiked armour and herbivorous diets. Their diversity was staggering, and in many Triassic ecosystems, they were apex predators. Yet their strategy revolved around short bursts of speed and reliance on ambush. They were formidable, but specialized. The Ornithodyrans, by contrast, experimented with lightness. Their bones became hollow, their limbs lengthened, their joints stiffened to improve running efficiency. They were not massive, but they were fast and agile. This design was a foundation for what would become an evolutionary explosion. Creatures capable of leaping, gliding, and eventually flying. But at this point, they were not rulers. They were opportunists, filling ecological niches others ignored, eating insects, small reptiles, and whatever they could find. Fossils like Lagopithecus and Marasuchus show this story clearly. Small, lightly built animals with long hind limbs and proportionally large brains. They were not apex predators, but they were alert, mobile, and adaptable. Their anatomy even hints at behavioral changes, such as better thermoregulation and possibly early parental care. Though these behaviors are difficult to prove, they may have played an unseen role in survival. Meanwhile, the world they lived in remained unpredictable. The Triassic climate swung between extremes. Temperatures were high, rainfall erratic, and volcanic activity frequent. Ecosystems shifted constantly, and no animal could rely on stability. In this world, flexibility was more valuable than brute strength. Animals that could reproduce quickly, migrate when food disappeared, and tolerate harsh conditions had the advantage. Archosaurs had all of these traits. As time passed, the differences between Pseudosutians and Ornithodorans deepened. The Pseudosutians produced a spectacular variety of forms, towering hunters like Postosuchus, armored herbivores, semi-aquatic ambush predators, and everything in between. The Ornithodyrans took a different approach. Their evolutionary focus on lightness and efficiency made them highly mobile. They didn't dominate every environment, but they could spread far and fast, adapting quickly to opportunities. This dual strategy, heavy, armored predators on one branch and nimble, efficient hunters on the other, gave the Archosaurs an extraordinary reach. By the late Triassic, they had become the dominant vertebrates across much of the planet. Fossil beds in South America, Europe, and Africa all tell the same story: a shift in fauna. Synapsids, once the rulers of the Permian, now lingered at the margins. Archosaurs filled every niche, from the swamp-dwelling Pseudosutians to the first small, agile dinosaurs like Herrerasaurus and Eoraptor. These early dinosaurs were not giants, but their bodies carried the hallmarks of their future success: long legs, upright posture, and specialized teeth for hunting or grazing. Competition between Pseudosutians and early dinosaurs was not a clash of giants. It was subtle. Both groups hunted the same prey, occupied the same floodplains, and faced the same pressures. For a time, they coexisted, with Pseudosutians still holding the top predator roles, but the groundwork was shifting. Then, at the very end of the Triassic, Earth's stability shattered again. Massive volcanic eruptions from the Central Atlantic magmatic province ripped the supercontinent apart. Lava floods blanketed the land, and greenhouse gases surged. Carbon dioxide levels spiked, and sulfur aerosols dimmed sunlight. Another extinction event struck. Many Pseudosutians, despite their former dominance, were wiped out in this ecological collapse. The lineage that emerged strongest from this cataclysm was not the armored ambush predators, but the lightly built, fast-growing ornithodyrans, the dinosaurs. Their design, which emphasized efficiency and adaptability, gave them a survival advantage. The Archosaurs had not conquered the planet through raw power. They had done so by reshaping their bodies into something new: animals that were light, yet strong, efficient, yet versatile. These traits allowed them to pass through an evolutionary bottleneck that destroyed many competitors. Once through that door, they would rule the Earth for the next 150 million years. Their rise was not a straightforward march of dominance. It was a slow, often invisible process of refinement. Upright posture, advanced lungs, and rapid growth were subtle changes, but in a volatile world, they made all the difference. Forests recovered, conifers spread across uplands, and cycads and seed ferns returned to riverbanks. These plants were drought-tolerant, fire-resistant, and able to create habitats suitable for large herbivores. Archosaurs expanded into these spaces, feeding on plants and the creatures that lived among them. By diversifying their forms, they secured every niche. Some became scavengers, some grazers, and some apex predators. Pseudosutians, like Saurosuchus, grew massive, rivaling modern crocodiles, while dinosaurs began their own rise as swift, lightly built predators. In Argentina's Ischigualasto Formation, some of the earliest true dinosaurs appear alongside their Pseudosutian contemporaries, showing that the transition between these groups was not a clean replacement, but a gradual shift in dominance. The Archosaurs' story is one of persistence. They were not inherently stronger or more intelligent than their competitors, but they were more versatile. Evolution rewarded those traits most in a world where the ground itself was unstable. The late Triassic extinction cemented their future. The massive volcanic activity eliminated many Pseudosutians, clearing ecological space for dinosaurs to rise. Pterosaurs began to take to the skies, exploiting aerial niches that no other vertebrates had yet reached, and crocodilian ancestors, though reduced in diversity, survived in aquatic environments, maintaining their lineage to the present day. This was the moment when dinosaurs stepped forward as the planet's dominant terrestrial vertebrates. But their story is still ahead. For now, we leave the Triassic at a moment of transformation, with Archosaurs standing as the architects of a new era. Their rise was not a conquest marked by violence and dominance alone. It was a quiet revolution of anatomy, physiology, and ecological flexibility. They had unlocked a door through which only a few would pass, and for the next 150 million years they would shape the world behind it. A fragile silence follows the comet's echo. Forests thinned, oceans warmed. As the Triassic world stitched itself back together, it became a crucible of pressure and potential. In the heat-hazed basins of what is now northwestern Argentina, the land rippled with life that had survived the cataclysm. Strange, patchwork creatures darted across cracked mud and fern-laced undergrowth, each one locked in a daily wager against extinction. Some bore teeth like razors, others wore armor like old gods. The ruling class of this age was not dinosaurs. It was the Rawasuchians, crocodile-like beasts with thick limbs, towering frames, and skulls like anvils. Yet beneath their stomping feet and the roots of monkey puzzle trees, something smaller stirred. It was not glorious. It was not particularly dangerous. But it was fast. And for now, that was enough. The first dinosaurs, emerging from the margins of the Triassic world, were lithe and lean. They did not look like tyrants or kings. They looked like prey. Eoraptor, among the earliest known, was barely the size of a medium dog, with delicate bones, a long tail for balance, and a build that spoke of speed over strength. It hunted insects, and perhaps small vertebrates, weaving between shadows like a living whisper. Herrerasaurus, longer and more robust, bore deeper jaws and sharper teeth, but it moved like a thief rather than a conqueror. These creatures existed beneath a volatile sky, where volcanic ash fell like snow, droughts lingered, and every drink from a stream could be the last. Their survival did not come from power, but from absence, from learning to move unseen, unnoticed, and alive. They shared their world with giants, Saurosuchus, Hyperodapodon, vast synapsids with crushing jaws and terrifying lunges. These were not the dinosaurs' prey, they were their landlords, and their dominance came at a steep cost. But evolution has always loved an underdog, especially one that does not yet realize it is an underdog. In Argentina's Ishigualasto Basin, the rock has preserved everything: bones, footprints, fronds of ancient ferns, even silence. From this record, paleontologists can read a liturgy written in stone. It tells a story of competition, not of triumph, but of endurance. The earliest dinosaurs did not storm the stage of history in a blaze of dominance. They crept in. They scavenged. They took what was left when others had had their fill. Slowly, generation by generation, their edges sharpened. They were not stronger. They were not necessarily smarter. They were simply better suited to a world in chaos, better at the one thing this age demanded: survival through endurance. Where larger animals required more space, more food, and more stability, these small pioneers thrived on less. They grew quickly, reproduced early, and remained agile until death. They were warm-blooded, or at least warm-blooded enough to operate in a world dominated by cold-blooded strategies. This quiet physiological shift allowed them to outrun extinction itself. It was not a revolution. It was a whisper turning into a hum that, in time, would become thunder. No one standing in Ishigualasto 230 million years ago would have bet on the dinosaurs' future. They were background noise, flitting shadows in the underbrush, the kind of creatures that might have been crushed underfoot while someone searched for something grander. Yet here, in this seemingly insignificant corner of the world, a dynasty began in the heat, in the dust, in the overlooked footsteps of the forgotten. The rulers of this age were not dinosaurs. Not yet. The wet shadows of the late Triassic belonged to the Crurotarsans, the ancient crocodile line Archosaurs. These animals were living siege weapons. Carnifex, with its slender limbs and blade-edged jaws, could sprint after prey in short bursts. Postosuchus, one of their towering kin, stretched over 4 meters long and walked tall on pillar-like legs. Its skull was massive and shaped like a meat hook, designed for killing. Against predators like these, dinosaurs were nothing but punctuation marks in a story written by other hands. And still, they endured. A skeleton found in Ishigualasto tells their story. Eoraptor, just over a metre long, with hollow bones, a narrow snout, and claws like needles. Its name means dawn thief, though what it truly stole was a glimpse of the future. Hererosaurus, its larger cousin, stalked forest clearings, lean and predatory, but even at over 3 meters long, it was dwarfed by the reptilian titans that ruled the land. Their success was subtle, hidden in their anatomy. Their hips, unlike those of many contemporaries, held their legs beneath their bodies, making them efficient runners. This was no trivial change. It was a quiet, evolutionary leap. In a world of ambush predators and flash floods, speed meant survival, but the earth was shifting beneath their feet. Pangaea groaned as tectonic plates strained. Volcanoes belched carbon dioxide, darkening skies. Seasons warped into unpredictability. Droughts grew harsher, and floods turned deadlier. The reign of the Crurotarsans was tied to stability, and as the climate fractured, they faltered. Their eggs, buried in soil that no longer stayed moist, failed more often. Their heavy bodies struggled in erratic landscapes. Extinction, patient as always, began its slow approach. The small ones, however, thrived. Dinosaur lungs, already efficient, processed oxygen in a way that let them stay active in this thin, hot atmosphere. Their eggs, often laid in open nests, endured temperature swings better than those of their rivals. Their light frames, speed, and opportunistic diets allowed them to scavenge, sprint, and disperse across changing ecosystems. They did not rise because they were mighty. They rose because they were ready. One by one, the old kings fell. Rauisuchians, phytosaurs, and other armoured behemoths that had ruled the riverbanks vanished. Their skeletons now rest twisted in Triassic mudstone, their final stories sealed in iron and clay. In their absence, the earth did not become empty. It became open. Into this void stepped creatures like Coelophysis, slender and serpent-necked, gliding through the undergrowth like smoke. Fossil evidence suggests these animals may have hunted in groups, swarming carcasses with precision. They were not large, they were not heavily built, but they were fast, they were clever, and they survived. And they were not alone. Even as the giants faltered, the small ones multiplied. Evolution honed their designs in silence. These dinosaurs were not born rulers, they were survivors. Their dominance was not destiny, but a byproduct of resilience. And in a world rewritten by fire and famine, resilience mattered more than size or strength. In Ishigualasto, the tracks of these creatures remain etched in volcanic ash. Tiny three-toed prints, pressed lightly into ancient mud, show them moving cautiously, perhaps in loose family bands. The ground they crossed cracked as it dried, and storms buried their trails under new layers of ash. Millions of years later, their movements still speak. They tell of lives lived in the shadows, darting from cover to cover, fleeing from predators that no longer exist. At first glance, these early dinosaurs would not have inspired awe. They lacked towering spines or colossal limbs. They were slender, bird-like in their proportions. Many had hollow bones and narrow skulls. Some were feathered not for flight but for warmth, camouflage, or display. Feathers were not symbols of grandeur, but tools of survival, a way to endure the Triassic's wild temperature swings. Necessity, as always, bred revolution. In their smallness, early dinosaurs found freedom. They did not need massive territories to sustain themselves. They did not need mountains of food to survive. They reproduced quickly, allowing mutations and adaptations to spread through populations at remarkable speeds. Each new generation was a test, a roll of evolutionary dice. With every cycle, they became sharper, faster, and more efficient. Meanwhile, the crocodile-line Archosaurs, the Crurotarsans, grew increasingly specialized. Many became trapped in ecological roles they could not abandon. As climates shifted, their bulk and reliance on specific nesting conditions became liabilities. The dinosaurs, in contrast, spread like water through every available niche. Some remained small and agile. Others, over time, would grow massive, filling roles their ancestors could not imagine. But even the giants that followed, would carry echoes of their humble beginnings in their bones. Speed, efficiency, and adaptability. They had once been overlooked creatures darting between the legs of giants. Now, the giants were gone, and the dinosaurs stood alone. The world they inherited was not kind. The Triassic was still volatile, scarred by tectonic rifts and volcanic activity. Yet this instability worked in their favour. Dinosaurs thrived in the unpredictability, their physiology designed for activity and endurance. Their warm-blooded metabolisms and efficient respiratory systems gave them stamina. Their reproductive strategies, from open nesting to rapid growth, ensured their survival through cycles of destruction and rebirth. Step by step they claimed the Earth. By the end of the Triassic, they were no longer background creatures. They were everywhere. Some hunted in packs. Some grazed on the recovering vegetation, nibbling on conifers and cycads. Others scavenged the remains of creatures that had fallen victim to floods and famine. Every niche became theirs, and so the kingdom began not with the roar of giants, but with the whisper of survivors. Their steps grew bolder beneath the shadowed canopy of conifers. Once peripheral players, these wiry reptiles had begun to claim ground with surprising tenacity. The climate was restless. Arid pulses and sudden floods stitched the land into patchworks of opportunity and collapse. But across what is now Argentina, Brazil, and India, the strange little creatures we called dinosaurs were beginning to multiply in shape and kind. How did such modest animals come to dominate an entire world? The fossil record offers us only shattered fragments, but within those bones is the beginning of an answer. The late Triassic, roughly 220 million years ago, was not yet a dinosaur world. The ruling clades remained the sprawling Rauisuchians, the croc-like phytosaurs, and the peculiar armoured etosaurs. These were animals of power. Their jaws could crush bone, their footprints spanned riversides like imperial stamps. Yet while the giants swaggered through floodplains, the early dinosaurs kept running. The evidence is thin, but it suggests that speed was one of their earliest tools. From Ischigualasto in northwestern Argentina, we glimpse creatures like Eoraptor and Herosaurus, nimble, bipedal, and light-boned. They were not dominant, they were fast, and that may have saved them. As droughts came and food vanished, the cost of heavy muscle became steep. Large-bodied predators fell into decline. Meanwhile, the agile generalists began to diversify. Evolution, like a market crash, had created a vacuum, and into that ecological silence, the dinosaurs expanded, but not as one. They were already splitting. Theropods were the hunters. Slender and sharp-toothed, they ranged from the primitive Herosaurus to the blade-jawed Coelophysis, whose skeletons turn up by the dozen at Ghost Ranch in New Mexico. These were pack hunters, or so some paleontologists argue, though the evidence for coordinated behavior remains contested. What we do know is that they were lightweight. Long necks, hollow bones, and strong hind limbs hint at a metabolism far more active than their sluggish contemporaries. In another direction, the sauropodomorphs began their journey. These early relatives of the giants were still small, some under 2 meters long, but the lineage would become legendary. Plateosaurus, for example, was already experimenting with size. We find its fossils scattered across what is now Europe, suggesting an animal that browsed in groups. Quadrupedal gait was not yet locked in. Many of these protosauropods still moved on 2 legs, grasping ferns and cycads with clawed hands. And then came the ornithischians, the bird-hipped ones. They were the quiet vegetarians, browsing low plants and evolving beaks before birds ever arrived. The early forms, like Pisanosaurus, were small and elusive. They left fewer traces, but they too would one day rise. So, in this era of global flux, 3 dynasties were emerging, each with its own philosophy of survival. The quick-footed carnivores, the long-necked browsers, the low-slung herbivores with cheeks and beaks. But was this merely chance, or something deeper in their bones? So they ran. Their hind limbs grew longer, muscles stringing taut like bow cords across pelvic bones, designed not for walking, but leaping. A new rhythm entered the earth. Clawed feet struck forest floors with staccato beats. Theropods, sleek and fire-eyed, did not share the lumbering gait of their ancestors. They sliced forward like living spears, eyes fixed ahead, a future sharpening at every kill. But speed was not their only gift. Inside, their hearts pumped faster, their lungs breathed deeper. Some even had air sacs, invisible engines of stamina borrowed from a lineage that would one day take to the skies. They chased anything slower than themselves. And in a world still teeming with crurotarsans, mammal-like reptiles, and insectoid amphibians the size of dogs, there was much to chase. Flesh had never moved so fast. Blood had never run so hot. Behind them, but not far, came the long-necked walkers. They began small, not the titans of later days, but lean-bodied prosauropods like Plateosaurus, testing a world their children would eventually own. At first glance, they seemed awkward. Neck too long, tail too heavy, but they had balance. Evolution, patient and deliberate, had tuned them like an instrument. They reared, sometimes walked on 2 legs, sometimes 4, not predators, but not prey without cost. Their sheer size began to hint at a strategy that was both passive and brutal. Outgrow your enemies. A hungry Rauisuchian might take down a small Plateosaurus once, but if the next one was just a bit larger, the price became too steep. Slowly, their bones grew air pockets. Slowly, their lungs mirrored those of their fleet-footed cousins. It was as if the 2 lineages, carnivore and herbivore, were locked in a quiet arms race. But instead of weapons, they traded adaptations. Swiftness for bulk, jaw for gut. The land began to stretch to hold their footsteps. Elsewhere, a quieter revolution unfolded. Ornithischians. Small, unassuming, and mostly ignored. But what they lacked in flair, they made up for in innovation. Their hips bent differently. Their teeth arranged like tools. While theropods tore, and sauropodomorphs swallowed, ornithischians ground. They chewed. A rare thing in the Triassic. With beaks and backplates, with cheeks and battery-like molars, they whispered a future where herbivores didn't just escape. They resisted. Some huddled in burrows. Some bristled with proto-armor. Others simply multiplied. Fast breeders. Fast adapters. Their survival strategy wasn't strength, it was spread. Every ecosystem they touched saw more of them the next season. The Triassic was ending, but it hadn't given up its old guards. Postosuchus still hunted. Phytosaurs still lurked in swamps like nightmare crocodiles. The mammal-like cynodonts still scurried underfoot, intelligent and persistent. But pressure is a sculptor, and every drought, every volcanic cough, every shift in the strange magnetic sky tipped the scales in favor of the dinosaurs. It wasn't one moment. It was many. Each new hatchling that ran a bit faster, each predator that starved too soon, each seedling that grew in a new way under dinosaur feet. Empires don't always begin with war. Sometimes they begin with persistence. And so the arms race of size, speed, and strategy began in earnest. Across the fractured supercontinent of Pangaea, vast floodplains and fern-filled basins became testing grounds for natural selection's newest experiments. Sauropodomorphs, once slender and sprightly, began trending toward gigantism. Their vertebrae lightened with air sacs, their bones lengthened like slow-drawn bows, and their necks stretched into sweeping arcs capable of grazing multiple plant levels without a single step. The great survivors would not be those who moved quickly, but those who moved less, burning fewer calories to fill larger bellies over broader ranges. Their breath hinted at high-performance lungs, not unlike the birds that would one day inherit the sky. With each generation, their limbs thickened, their skulls shrank, and their stomachs deepened, becoming walking bioreactors that turned tough Triassic foliage into muscle and momentum. Theropods, meanwhile, sharpened both mind and tooth. Though still modest in size, they carried their intelligence forward like torches in the dark. Keen eyes, hollow bones, strong hind limbs. These were the hunters and opportunists, the problem-solvers and bone-pickers. Coelophysis, lean and sinewed, thrived in packs. their narrow jaws filled with xiphodont teeth, knife-like blades serrated for slicing. Their long tails, stiffened for balance, turned every step into a potential spring. And when prey grew scarce, they turned on each other. Cannibalism, brutal but effective, spoke to a time when survival meant efficiency at any cost. Ornithischians took a different route. Shorter, lower to the ground, often overlooked in discussions of early dinosaur powerhouses, but they innovated in silence. Leaf-shaped teeth ground coarse vegetation. Their cheeks kept food in their mouths as they chewed. Some grew beaks, others armor. A few, maybe, had primitive quills. They were already preparing for the ages to come, not through dominance but resilience. As others chased size or speed, ornithischians diversified. And in doing so they weathered the storms to come. One trait bound these groups together: a possible edge in metabolism. Debate still swirls, like ancient dust, over whether dinosaurs were warm-blooded, cold-blooded, or something in between. But evidence mounts for an active, elevated physiology. Growth rings in bone, isotope signatures in teeth, the mere pace of their rise. These clues whisper of creatures running hotter, growing faster, living shorter but fuller lives. And in a world of climatic flux and ecological volatility, that edge mattered. It meant faster response to food availability, more agile escape from predators, quicker reproduction to fill vacated niches. None of this happened overnight. Millions of years passed between steps. Forests rose and fell. Volcanoes reshaped the horizon. Inland seas crept and retreated. Yet across that time, the patterns held. The dinosaurs, born from the fringes of Archosaurian kin, had begun to tip the balance. They weren't yet kings of the world, but they were learning, climbing, testing the limits of body and world. In the distance, the age of dominance loomed. Not with a roar, but a steady, continent-wide ascent. Predators refining their craft, herbivores adapting to pressures, competition growing more intricate. The Triassic world was shifting beneath their clawed feet, and as new empires formed in fang, feather, and fossil, one truth became clear: the rulers of tomorrow were already on the move. Ash falls softly across a dying world. The Triassic is closing its eyes. The earth trembles under the weight of something deeper than hunger or predation. Far below the crust, heat gathers and pressure builds. What begins as a subtle splitting of the supercontinent becomes far more catastrophic. From the central seams of Pangaea, magma surges outward in colossal floods, carving rift valleys and igniting the largest volcanic province the planet has ever known, recognized now by satellite images and fractured cores. Back then, there were only creatures, air, and fire. The eruptions are not singular. They come in pulses. The evidence lies layered, literally and figuratively, in basalt flows spanning millions of square kilometers. Over several 100,000 years, the Central Atlantic magmatic province expelled more than 3 million cubic kilometers of lava. But it wasn't only the lava. Invisible yet devastating gases followed: carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur dioxide. They drifted skyward and altered the chemistry of the air itself. Part of what we know comes from isotope ratios locked in ancient rocks. These point to rapid warming episodes, followed by sharp cooling. Climate buckled under volcanic instability. Forests that had once stretched across the land dwindled. Leaf fossils bear stress marks, stunted growth, deformations. Insects, once diverse, leave fewer traces. Amphibians vanish in clusters. Entire families of archosaurs drop from the record without clear transitions. We cannot say precisely how each lineage responded. The fossil record is patchy, and extinction often hides its mechanism. Some animals likely starved as plants failed. Others may have suffered respiratory collapse as oxygen dipped. The oceans suffered too. Anoxic events deoxygenated dead zones spread widely. Shelled organisms that had thrived for millions of years struggled to calcify in increasingly acidic waters. Through all this, dinosaurs persisted, not as lords, not yet, but as quiet beneficiaries of collapse. Their physiology, as far as we can reconstruct it, offered an edge. Air sacs, like those of modern birds, may have given a more efficient breathing system an advantage in low-oxygen air. Upright, mobile postures let them traverse great distances in search of food and shelter. Their eggshells show signs of adaptation, perhaps affording protection against a shifting climate. It is not that they were better, only more suited to what remained. Lineages that had overshadowed them, including many pseudosutians and therapsids, withered or shrank to the margins. What few mammals endured were probably small, nocturnal, cautious, a survival strategy, not a triumph. There was no single moment of victory, no scene of conquest, just one group outlasting others in a world of chaos. As lava cooled and the air settled, they stood in a quieter world, with fewer rivals and a great deal of space. The eruptions do not come all at once. They pulse like a wounded planet bleeding in slow motion. Scientists call them flood basalts, vast outpourings of lava that do not spatter from cones but spill from great cracks like a ruptured artery. In what is now central and western Pangaea, molten rock pushes upward for hundreds of thousands of years. The Central Atlantic Magmatic Province Camp may have covered over 10 million square kilometers, an area larger than modern Europe. These provinces are unlike anything humans have witnessed. The scale resists metaphor, yet the effects are legible in stone. Ash beds, basalt layers, carbon-rich sediments. Together they form a clock of catastrophe. Fossil layers above the oldest flows show a clear pattern. Diversity shrinks, then shifts. In the seas, perhaps 1 in 2 species disappears. Ammonoids, conodonts, reef builders decline sharply. On land, the record is more fragmented, but where it survives, it tells of vanishing synapsids and early archosaurs that do not cross into the next era. The drivers are debated, yet one pathway recurs. CO toys, released in pulses, possibly with methane and sulfur dioxide. These gases transformed climate. Rapid greenhouse warming, acid rain, and ocean acidification left many ecosystems unable to recover between pulses. If early pulses killed some, later ones stalled healing. This is not a sharp final moment, but a stuttering collapse, still enough to redraw the evolutionary map. What rose from this broken earth were not heroes. Not all who endured did so by strength or cunning. Some simply lived in the right places. Some were lucky. Among them were dinosaurs, small theropods, and basal sauropodomorphs that once huddled at the margins, now finding an open world. With competitors gone, they diversified quickly. Within a few million years they grew in size, shape, and role, taking plains, forests, and skies. What puzzles scientists is the speed of their radiation. In early Jurassic fossils, just a geological blink later, we already see 3 great lineages: theropods, sauropodomorphs, ornithischians, all distinct, all poised to define the next 135 million years. This pattern implies seeds planted earlier, in the late Triassic. Lacking more fossils, we can only infer the pace and complexity of their rise. The gaps are large, the bones are few. Still, the evidence points to an evolutionary explosion in a vacuum left by fire. Even then, life was not stable. The crust remained restless, continents continued rifting. Ecosystems were young, chaotic, prone to collapse. For all their future grandeur, dinosaurs were not yet kings. They were opportunists, stepping onto a stage reset by catastrophe. Above them, the sky glowed red. A warming world does not rise evenly. Some regions sweltered while others cooled, held in a chaotic balance of shifting air currents and seething ocean heat. Plants that once flourished withered, thinning the base of the food web. Fungi may have bloomed in strange abundance, decomposing the fallen. The record is uneven. We know little of these forests. Their wood mostly gone, their leaves reduced to impressions. Yet something clearly changed. Across the central Atlantic, the earth split open again. More basalt, more gas, more dust. Camp, whose outline is pieced from scattered outcrops and magnetic stripes on the seafloor, may have rivaled or exceeded the Siberian eruptions. The pulses were episodic, perhaps 4 major surges, separated by tens of thousands of years. Each wave spilled lava across continents. Ash may have dimmed skies from pole to pole, but the invisible gases mattered most. Carbon dioxide and methane rose in surges. The greenhouse effect intensified. Rainfall patterns likely shifted. Oceans absorbed carbon and became more acidic. The shells of marine plankton, when they survived, grew thinner, more fragile, or vanished in places. These losses trickled upward, small failures compounding into cascades. Reefs struggled. Ammonites again declined. Some marine reptiles faded. On land, many large cruotarsans, the crocodile, line archosaurs, lost whole branches. Reasons remain uncertain. Heat stress, prey loss, freshwater collapse, or something else. Perhaps multiple stressors struck together, each too subtle to fossilize, yet overwhelming in concert. In many cases, we can track only absences, not experiences. The extinction was not instant. It may have spanned hundreds of thousands of years, long enough for survivors to adapt, shift ranges, and wait out the worst. Still, when the tally is imagined, entire groups had vanished or become ghosts of themselves. In their place, something familiar rose. Dinosaurs, once peripheral, moved into abandoned spaces. Their hips and lungs, their upright stance and efficient movement may have given an edge. Yet the exact mechanisms of success remain tangled by small samples and patchy rock. What survives in stone is not always what thrived in life. Even so, their presence expands in range and diversity, from small feathered bipeds to hulking quadrupeds, from opportunistic predators to wide-mouthed herbivores. This was their chance, and they took it. The early Jurassic was a strange, unsettled place. Forests of conifers and ginkgos returned, cautiously. The skies carried insects, perhaps fewer than before. Amphibians held on, their lineage older than the forests. Crocodilian ancestors lurked in the shadows. But dinosaurs now moved openly in the sun. They had not planned any of this, nor outcompeted rivals in a grand strategy. They had simply endured. Survival sometimes is not about strength or intelligence, but about being in the right place, with the right traits, when the world changes. They were there. The world changed. Fire did not cleanse the planet. It did not leave it empty. It reset the board. The Triassic ended not with a bang, but with the long hiss of lava cooling in sea and soil smoke. Then silence. What rose from the ash was not a blank slate, but a story half written. In that unfinished script, dinosaurs would write the next act. In the end, the passage from Triassic to Jurassic reads less like a clash than a rebalancing. Stepwise pulses, stacked lavas, dwindling signals of forests and reefs. These frame a long transition in which opportunity, not overthrow, governed outcomes. Dinosaurs filled openings because their bodies and habits matched a world of distance, drought, and flux. Efficient lungs, upright strides, rapid growth advantages, shaped earlier, proved serviceable when the air ran thin and the ground kept breaking. Chance played a part. What matters is the shape that followed. Where silence widened, they moved. Where rivals fell, they spread. Where ash hardened, they crossed. And when the sky finally paled, they were already there, already many. The rules did not change in a moment. They shifted like fault lines under stress, slowly, invisibly, until the tension broke. When it did, the world itself fractured. What happened to Pangaea cannot be reconstructed from a single site or sequence. It requires us to stitch together geological stories scattered across thousands of miles. Around 200 million years ago, that once unified landmass began to rupture, a process that would last tens of millions of years. The rifts first appeared in what we now call the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province. This immense volcanic system stretched from modern-day Nova Scotia to Brazil, from Morocco to the Iberian Peninsula. What emerged from its cracks was not just lava, but a rewiring of the planet's architecture. The continents didn't just move. They breathed new climates into existence. Where once there had been vast interiors of dry heat, humid coastlines now formed, and monsoonal rains swept across regions that had known only aridity. Mountains lifted, valleys stretched open, and wind patterns shifted like a stirred pot. There is evidence preserved in the sediments of the Newark supergroup that cyclical climate patterns tied to Milankovitch cycles became more pronounced during this time. The landscape became a kaleidoscope, and so did life. Why does continental drift matter so deeply to evolution? Because isolation builds difference. Connection invites exchange. As landmasses broke apart and drifted toward new latitudes, the boundaries between ecosystems began to reconfigure. Some populations were severed from their relatives, left to evolve alone in changing climates. Others, once separated by deserts or highlands, found new corridors of migration opening up as rift valleys collapsed or sea levels rose. For ancient organisms, these new maps were not optional. They were fate. A small shift in land or water could mean extinction for one species and explosive opportunity for another. Among the latter were the sauropodomorphs. Once small and bipedal, these early relatives of giants had already begun growing during the late Triassic. But the Jurassic set them free. With forests now lush and expansive in parts of what would become South America, India, and Africa, their size exploded. The fossil record of creatures like Archosaurs in India and Volcanodon in southern Africa suggests that by the early Jurassic, sauropods had already become some of the largest animals ever to walk on land. Their bones speak of long necks for high browsing, deep chests for vast lungs, and columnar limbs built like marble pillars. Yet even with all this, we still don't know exactly how they got so large so quickly. Could it have been the warm, oxygen-rich atmosphere? Or their unique lung system, resembling that of birds, which may have enabled more efficient breathing? Perhaps their gigantism was not a single adaptation, but an emergent strategy from 100 quiet pressures. Whatever the case, their rise was no accident. It was a gravitational pull within the new order of the Jurassic. The familiar silhouettes of the Triassic were fading, replaced by a new rhythm of life driven by shifting lands and changing skies. Where once stood the low-lying supercontinent, now gaping rifts began to open, spewing basalt and steam. We cannot be certain of the tempo, but the pulse of tectonics was steady and transformative. As Pangaea tore itself apart, the Earth groaned. New oceans seeped between widening cracks, birthing coastlines where none had existed. These embryonic seas, warm and shallow, became cradles for biodiversity, even as they carved invisible boundaries into once unbroken terrain. It is tempting to speak of these changes as swift, as if entire ecosystems evolved overnight, but the fossil record cautions against this illusion. Millions of years blurred one age into the next, and yet, through that blur, new giants began to rise. Sauropods, once modest in scale, began to stretch the limits of vertebrate engineering. Vertebrae grew cavernous, filled with air sacs rather than solid bone. Limbs thickened, restructured to support almost cathedral-like weight. There is no blueprint for such size. What selective pressures pushed them to become the largest land animals of all time is still debated. It is also possible, though difficult to prove, that size itself became a form of security in a world of increasingly formidable predators. Among those predators were the theropods. In the Jurassic, they too were undergoing a quiet revolution. While earlier meat-eaters like Coelophysis had relied on speed and numbers, new forms experimented with bulk, jaws, and a disturbing efficiency. Allosaurus, for instance, wielded a skull less solid than expected. Its bite may have been less forceful than imagined, but the neck musculature suggests something else, a strike-and-retreat tactic, where the jaws acted more like serrated pliers than a sledgehammer. Still, what we see hints at specialization, intelligence, and an increasingly complex food web. The land these animals roamed was no longer the dry, seasonally parched expanse of earlier epochs. As rifting continued, monsoons swept across the new continental margins. Floodplains expanded. River systems braided themselves across vast territories, creating environments that could support both abundance and scale. This might explain the proliferation of herbivores in the Middle Jurassic, not just sauropods, but stegosaurs and early ornithopods. whose teeth and guts were increasingly adapted to deal with tougher, more fibrous plant matter. Each fossil bed from this time is a window into a local world. From the Morrison Formation in North America to the Tendaguru beds of East Africa, we find different compositions, different faunal casts. But the outlines are strangely similar. Big-bodied herbivores, apex carnivores, lush, swampy margins, and a supporting cast of pterosaurs, crocodile-like creatures, and the first quiet rustlings of mammals in the undergrowth. This repetition suggests ecological stability, yet we must be cautious. What survives in stone is only a fragment, biased toward what was buried, what was preserved, and what we have happened to find. Still, in these sedimentary layers, there is motion, not just of continents, but of lineages, clades diverging, adaptations flowering. The world was not just alive, it was evolving, reacting to its own rearrangement. Even among giants, there were whispers of precision. The great sauropods, now stretching toward unimaginable sizes, were not merely growing for spectacle. Their elongated necks may have been evolutionary compromises, not just feeding machines, but thermal regulators, display structures, and possibly tools for subtle interspecies communication. The fossil record can show us vertebrae the size of bar stools, yet it is silent on what these long necks truly meant in daily life. We cannot know with certainty whether they browsed high or low, or even if their necks were carried upright or outstretched like biological cranes. What little trackways we have suggest a slow, deliberate gait, graceful, in their own vast, plodding rhythm. Yet the ground beneath these titans was shifting in more ways than one. As Pangaea split, seas surged into rifts, creating new coastlines and inland seaways. Arid interiors gave way to lush deltas. Rainfall patterns changed. Monsoons that once drenched the supercontinent now curled around fragmented landmasses. This climatic turbulence carved pathways for evolutionary innovation. Isolation wasn't a barrier, it was a forge. In these isolated regions, theropods too began to stretch their limits. Some evolved massive skulls and biting force. Others shed weight, sprinted faster, perhaps hunted in coordinated bursts. It is easy to imagine them as pack hunters, but again, the rock does not speak clearly. Bone beds may suggest social behavior, or they may be the coincidental burial of rivals. Still, their diversity grew sharper. The blueprint of a predator was being redrawn over and over again, each iteration fine-tuned for a different niche, a different prey, a different climate. Amid this arms race, the smaller, feathered relatives of theropods also began to diversify. We do not see wings just yet, but we see clues, hollow bones, quill knobs, protofeathers. Whether these structures were for warmth, display, or primitive gliding, we can only hypothesize. The selective pressures that gave rise to feathers may have had nothing to do with flight. Nature, in its quiet improvisation, often builds with one purpose and repurposes for another. What began as insulation may someday become lift. The oceans, too, refuse to stay behind. As the continents creaked apart, vast marine habitats bloomed. Shallow inland seas warmed quickly, fueling blooms of plankton, which in turn fed vast schools of fish, ammonites, and marine reptiles. Ichthyosaurs still reigned, their shapes eerily dolphin-like despite having no relation to mammals. Convergent evolution at work again. In time, they would be joined and perhaps outcompeted by the emerging pliosaurs and long-necked plesiosaurs. Their forms seem alien to us now, but they were exquisitely adapted. Paddles for limbs, eyes built for dim light, jaws lined with needle teeth. They were not just survivors of the Triassic extinction. Above and below, the web of life tangled and retangled. Plants, responding to new rain patterns and shifting latitudes, migrated across continents. Cycads and conifers stretched their ranges. Ferns recolonized disturbed ground. Each plant a quiet witness to upheaval. Each seed a genetic gamble thrown into a wind that no longer blew as it once did. The stage was no longer stable. It was moving. And so, life moved with it. Stillness, in the age of giants, was a rare thing. Even the silence of dawn trembled with the distant, thunderous footfalls of creatures so vast they warped the world around them. The Jurassic had fractured Pangaea, and now, in this dawning golden age of sauropods, the very land seemed to bow to its new masters. A mist lingers over a lush river valley. Beneath ancient conifers and cycads, a shadow shifts, a shadow that stretches longer than a city bus and stands taller than a house. Brachiosaurus, the giraffe of the Mesozoic, cranes its long neck skyward with effortless grace. Its body, massive yet strangely delicate, sways like a living tower, reaching into canopies no other herbivore could dream of. This is no anomaly, this is the norm. From North America to Patagonia, from what is now Tanzania to the baking flats of what will become Europe, sauropods have flourished. Argentinosaurus, possibly the largest of them all, moves like a continent unto itself. Its shoulder as high as a 2-story building, its weight comparable to a dozen elephants. Yet it moves, it breathes, it lives. How? This remains one of prehistory's most staggering mysteries. No land animal before or since has ever achieved such scale. Yet these creatures were not rare monsters. They were common. Herds in the hundreds once migrated across fern prairies, leaving trails etched into ancient earth like the grooves of a forgotten song. Size was not a fluke. It was a feature. In a world where predators were fast, fierce, and relentless, being massive was not only an advantage, it was a necessity. Growing large meant outgrowing danger. A juvenile diplodocus might be hunted by Allosaurus. A full-grown adult? Nearly untouchable. But mass alone could not explain the miracle of sauropods. It wasn't just that they were big, it was how they sustained themselves. Each sauropod consumed hundreds of kilograms of plant matter daily, yet their skulls were tiny, their teeth simple pegs, or rakes, unsuited for chewing. They swallowed leaves whole. Their long, hollow bones lightened the burden of gravity. Their necks were flexible bridges, allowing them to feed in wide arcs without moving their vast bodies. Inside, an engineering marvel churned. Air sacs, complex and bird-like, lightened their frames and allowed astonishing oxygen intake. Their guts, vast fermentation chambers, processed plants with microbial assistance. Evolution had forged these giants, not just through brute force, but through exquisite biological design. Yet their elegance extended beyond anatomy. In fossilized trackways, sauropods appear in groups. Adults shielded young within the herd. Tracks suggest coordinated movement, careful spacing, and even path reuse. These were not isolated behemoths. They were social titans, shaped by instinct and survival, to live together, move together, and perhaps even mourn together. And in the shadows of their colossal frames, something else thrived. Smaller creatures, more agile, opportunistic, and hungry. For every rise, a counterweight. For every titan, a hunter. The reign of the giants had not gone uncontested. Predators were watching. Evolution, always listening, was already planning its next move. As herds thundered across floodplains and fern savannas, the sauropods began to change the world beneath their feet. Every step of a diplodocus left shallow craters in the silt, slowly altering the landscape over centuries. Forests bent around their migratory routes. River deltas shifted course as the great beasts trudged through them in seasonal pilgrimage. Life responded. Evolution, as always, danced in rhythm with pressure. One of the most iconic giants of this age, Brachiosaurus, was a marvel of anatomical experimentation. Unlike its horizontal cousin Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus bore an elevated posture, giraffe-like, with long forelimbs and an upright neck that towered above the treetops. It was a creature designed to browse where few others could reach. The heart that powered such height was a biological mystery. How did it pump blood to a brain more than 8 meters above the chest? Scientists today debate whether it had a multi-chambered heart or a series of vascular valves to prevent fainting with each step. No fossil preserves the soft tissue needed to confirm this. We are left with only bones and educated guesses. These massive bodies demanded efficient systems. Sauropods had air sacs, similar to birds, a respiratory adaptation that lightened their skeletons and allowed for unidirectional airflow. This may have enabled them to breathe more effectively than mammals of today, despite their bulk. Hollow vertebrae supported their tremendous necks without collapsing under their own weight. Evolution had learned to hollow out the heavy and fill the empty with purpose. Size was not simply a byproduct of chance, it was strategy. Being large deterred predators, it allowed access to high foliage, it retained heat. In a world of seasonal droughts and sparse food, a bigger stomach meant the ability to process vast quantities of low-nutrient plant matter. Their size was their success. It was also their burden. Juveniles grew rapidly. Some sauropods may have gained over a ton each year, racing toward the safety of adulthood. Hatchlings were vulnerable, no bigger than a golden retriever. They may have lived in hidden nurseries, shielded by the labyrinthine roots of ancient conifers, or tucked into fern meadows beyond the reach of adult footfalls. Fossilized trackways show clusters of smaller prints following larger ones, like children trailing their elders, and those elders moved in herds. Herding behavior in sauropods is evidenced by mass death assemblages where dozens or even hundreds of individuals perish together, likely due to drought or flooding. Their remains fossilized side by side, their long necks tangled like braided river reeds. These events, tragic though they were, preserved a moment in time, a glimpse into their social lives. What was the rhythm of their days? Did they follow the sun, shifting east to west as the light moved? Did their calls echo through the fog at dawn? Low, resonant bellows that stirred the canopy and warned rivals of their approach? No voice box remains to confirm this. But the bones suggest a life of movement, of constant foraging, of kinship through scale. The reign of the giants was not a solitary saga. It was symphonic. We return now to the banks of a late Jurassic floodplain. The season is dry, and the cracked earth tells of long months without rain. Herds have dwindled, the weaker fallen behind. Yet the colossi still march. Brachiosaurus leads the slow procession, towering, vast, a living tower of bone and breath. Her nostrils, high atop her skull, snort dust into the wind. Her chest rises like a ship's hull, and each step punches a low, seismic echo through the crust. The herd stirs as the matriarch halts. Young brachiosaurs, no bigger than modern elephants, press close to their mothers. Gangly and unsteady, their legs too long for comfort, but they are growing fast. Every hour of sunlight draws in calories. Every leaf stripped from the canopy fuels a body designed to build the impossible to scale. From a distance, a flock of pterosaurs, ornithochirus, perhaps spirals in a wheeling gyre. The air tastes of ash. Fires must be raging to the south. The drought is worsening, but the giants do not panic. Their size is insurance. Few predators would dare strike a full-grown brachiosaur. The juveniles are vulnerable, but they are shielded by the body wall of the herd, a fortress of flesh and vigilance. Farther east, an Argentinosaurus stretches its neck like a cathedral arch, browsing from the tallest branches of an ancient conifer. This is South America, millions of years later. The continents have drifted. The skies remain unchanged. The formula perfected. Argentinosaurus may be the largest creature ever to walk the earth. 90 tons, some say, perhaps more. Its heart must be the size of a bathtub. Neck veins strain with pressure we can't yet fully explain. How did blood rise so far? How did lungs fill? How did joints survive? We don't know completely. Bones tell us size, but soft tissue rarely survives. The rest, we model. We guess. We test. They remain alien. Still, clues lie in the bones. Pneumatic vertebrae reduced weight. Bird-like lungs cycled oxygen efficiently. A 4-chambered heart? Likely. Perhaps a low or hybrid metabolism. Growth rings suggest hatchlings grew fast, reaching elephant size within a few years. The faster they grew, the fewer things could eat them. Natural selection, scaled. There's more. Rhythm. These animals didn't just exist, they moved in cycles. Herds didn't form by accident. They followed seasonal paths, migrated in pulses, raised young in safety. When one walked, others followed. When one trumpeted, the ground listened. Diplodocus, with its long whip-like tail, may have cracked it like a sonic weapon fast enough to break the sound barrier. A thunderclap from flesh and muscle, and still they moved forward. Gentle, immense, unshakable. This was the reign of the giants. Not loud, not quick, but total. When they passed, they reshaped the land. Trees evolved under their reach. Even climate danced to their weight. And when they fell, and the last one lay down, the earth itself shifted. Their bones would speak, and we would listen. And in that silence, the next age waited. We do not know if the air ever fell truly silent, but we do know this. When dinosaurs ruled the land and marine reptiles prowled the seas, something else was happening above. The skies, too, were being conquered. The first vertebrates to take to the air weren't birds. They were pterosaurs, not merely gliders, not flapping lizards, but fully powered flyers. Evolutionary pioneers that would, over the next 150 million years, perform the grandest aerial experiment nature ever conducted. The fossil record gives us fragments, hollow bones that crumble at a touch, impressions of wing membranes in the fine dust of ancient lagoons. A jaw here, a shoulder joint there. It is not generous. Yet what it offers is extraordinary. The earliest known pterosaurs, like Preondactylus, already display features so specialized they suggest an even earlier, still undiscovered lineage of proto-flyers. We are missing the preamble. Whatever came before left few traces, or none at all. Still, what we do have speaks volumes. A single elongated finger. A membrane of skin stretched between that finger, the body, and the hind limb. Light, pneumatic bones. A keeled sternum for powerful muscle attachment. All evidence points to a creature built not just to survive in the air, but to thrive in it. And they did, in bewildering variety. Some were as small as sparrows, dancing between ferns like butterflies. Others spanned the length of buses. Quetzalcoatlus may have stood taller than a giraffe when grounded, yet launched itself skyward with a vaulting leap and beat of wings. If that sounds impossible, it very nearly is. But physics suggests it could work. Barely. The margin between myth and reality in these giants is thinner than their bones. Much remains debated. Were the largest pterosaurs capable of sustained flight, or merely short bursts of gliding? Could they flap at all once airborne? Or did they rely on thermal currents like vultures? Estimates vary, models shift, and even muscle reconstructions remain speculative. Yet what keeps emerging is a picture of ingenuity. These were not primitive flyers, they were specialists. Their brains reflect it. CT scans of pterosaur skulls reveal enlarged flocculi, regions that control balance and head-eye coordination. Their inner ears were tuned to aerial feedback. This is not the anatomy of a creature guessing at flight. It is the signature of mastery. Yet no two pterosaurs are quite the same. Some evolved toothless beaks. Others kept needle-thin teeth for snatching fish mid-air. Many had crests, some small and bony, others massive and sail-like. Their purpose is uncertain. Species recognition? Sexual display? Aerodynamic stabilizers? The fossil record cannot answer definitively, but whatever their function, they remind us how much we still do not know. Even their skin, if we can call it that, raises questions. Preserved specimens from sites like the J-hole biota suggest they were covered not in scales or bare membrane, but in pycnofibers, hair-like filaments, possibly branched, possibly coloured, possibly homologous to feathers, or perhaps not. Strapped membranes, stretched between elongated fingers, filled the skies of the Mesozoic. At least, we believe they did. Fossils of pterosaurs, the first vertebrates known to achieve powered flight, tell only part of their story. The rest is guesswork stitched with maths, biomechanics, and sometimes a fair amount of awe. Pterosaur wings were built around an extraordinary fourth finger. It elongated dramatically to support a broad and flexible wing membrane, much like a modern bat. But that is where the similarities end. Their wings were likely composed of complex fibers, called actinofibrils, arranged in layers that may have allowed them to alter the tension of their wings mid-flight. This would be an adaptive marvel, but we must admit that such reconstructions are inferred from rare impressions. The texture and composition of these tissues vary wildly between fossil specimens, and so do the reconstructions. Size ranges boggle the mind. From Aneronathus, no larger than a sparrow, to Quetzalcoatlus northropi, with an estimated wingspan rivaling a small airplane. How could such a creature launch itself into the air? Debate circles around the quad-launch hypothesis, where pterosaurs would use their powerful limbs to vault skyward, pushing off with all fours like a spring-loaded catapult. Some believe the largest of them could only glide once aloft, perhaps taking off from cliffs or leveraging thermal updrafts like vultures. Yet, aerodynamic modelling suggests otherwise. With hollow bones, air sacs, and vast wingspans, they were not built merely for gliding. They were dynamic and muscular flyers. The problem is, bones alone cannot tell us how thick the musculature was, or how powerful the strokes. There is something else about their design that tempts the imagination. Their heads. Many bore crests of bizarre shape and size. Some were tall and blade-like, others curved or flattened like sails. Function? A mystery. Sexual display is one hypothesis. Aerodynamic stability, another. Perhaps both. One striking fossil from Brazil, Tupandactylus, reveals a crest so vast it defies reason. In life, it would have been far larger than the rest of the skull, made partly of soft tissue. A kind of rudder, a signal flare. What's more, it seems some juveniles had different crest shapes than adults, hinting at possible age-based roles or shifting display functions. Their beaks were often toothless. Some had long, sharp jaws. Others had pouch-like throats. The variety suggests a niche-rich ecosystem. Some skimmed water like modern skimmers. Others may have probed the ground. A few, like Pterodaustro, filtered food from water with comb-like teeth, flamingo-like in both feeding and colour. If pigmentation reconstructions based on melanosomes prove accurate. But even here, caution is key. Fossil pigments give us shapes, densities, and clues. They do not give us full colour. Reconstructions of vivid reds and blues must always carry a caveat. We do not yet have a complete palette. What we do know, or believe with some confidence, is that pterosaurs were not evolutionary dead ends. They lasted for over 150 million years, adapting to shifting climates, changing continents, and rival skies full of early birds. In the late Jurassic and early Cretaceous, these two groups, birds and pterosaurs, shared the air. Their coexistence likely shaped the flight styles and behaviours of both. Evidence for competition is circumstantial. Overlapping habitats, similar diets, but we cannot hear their calls or see their disputes. Only the layers of sediment remain, each one a frozen breath of vanished wind. Not every pterosaur leapt into the sky with majestic wingspans and graceful glides. Some barely skimmed above the ferns, perhaps flapping clumsily in short bursts before collapsing back to the ground. Among these were the aneronathids, tiny, fuzzy, and strange. With wide mouths and forward-facing eyes, they resembled something between a bat and a frog. Their fossils are rare, delicate as tissue paper, but the few that survived suggest they were aerial insect hunters. One specimen from the Jurassic of China preserves their fur-like pycnofibers in exquisite detail. Under scanning electron microscopes, these fibers show branching patterns, leading some researchers to propose a deep evolutionary link with feathers. It remains controversial. The sample size is too small, the structures too fragile. But it opens a tantalizing window into how flight and insulation may have evolved together in distant reptilian cousins. And yet, for all their evolutionary experiments, pterosaurs did not rule the skies uncontested. Birds emerged during the late Jurassic and would later diversify explosively, especially after the mass extinction that ended the reign of non-avian dinosaurs. Why pterosaurs vanished while birds endured is still debated. Some blame changing ecosystems or the rise of flowering plants, which might have reshaped insect populations and food chains. Others point to the impact event itself. Pterosaurs, especially the giants, may have required long maturation times and vast ranges to survive. After the asteroid, those conditions simply vanished. But these are only educated guesses. What the bones can't tell us, we can only imagine with caution. Were the last pterosaurs gliding over barren coastlines in a dying world, their silhouettes framed against a darkened sky? Or were they already in decline, eking out their final days in shrinking habitats as birds claimed the heights for good? The truth may lie in sediments not yet uncovered, or in fossils too faint to preserve the final whispers of a lineage that once filled the air. What we do know is that for over 150 million years, the skies above the Mesozoic world were alive with motion, not silent or empty, but crowded, noisy, and alive. From the tiny Anuronuthids flitting through twilight forests to the mighty Azdarchids scanning the floodplains from above, flight in this era was not a single success story but a library of experiments, some brief, others astonishingly enduring. Each fossil is a note in that long airborne symphony. Some are preserved in limestone slabs so fine that even the wing membranes and throat pouches remain outlined like ghostly shadows. Others are mere fragments, a tooth, a claw, a half-crushed skull. Together, they offer a glimpse into an evolutionary realm we still barely understand. The pterosaurs dared to do what few lineages had ever done before. They conquered the sky, and in doing so, they left behind a mystery that still pulls our gaze upward. The bones tell us little of the sounds. No fossil can whisper what it felt like to swim through those ancient waters. But if we listen closely to the shape of the skulls, the arc of their flippers, and the pressure of time, a murmur does rise. Something terrible and graceful once ruled the sea. In the early Triassic, while the land heaved and forests regrouped from mass extinction, a separate evolutionary gambit was quietly unfolding beneath the waves. Some creatures, once landbound, began drifting back to the water. Their limbs changed, their lungs stayed, and slowly, over tens of millions of years, they vanished into the deep as entirely new beings. Ichthyosaurs were among the first. Their lineage likely descended from small, lizard-like ancestors who had once scrambled over mudflats. The earliest ichthyosaurs still bore the marks of this ancestry. Their bodies were long, eel-like. They might have hunted in shallow lagoons, using agility rather than speed. But soon their form would harden into something remarkably fish-shaped. That transformation is no coincidence. Streamlining is a solution the ocean forces upon all its swimmers. Sharks, tuna, dolphins each took that same shape independentally, and so did ichthyosaurs. By the Jurassic, some ichthyosaurs were fully adapted for pelagic life. Their eyes had grown to the size of dinner plates, perhaps the largest eyes of any animal known. We suspect this allowed them to hunt in deep, twilight waters where sunlight thinned. Their flippers, once hands, now worked like rudders. Their tails forked into vertical crescents like those of modern fish. They no longer needed to crawl ashore. Birth happened underwater. Some fossils even preserved tiny embryos inside the mother's body, curled like sleeping commas. But despite their success, ichthyosaurs were not alone. As they sliced through the open ocean, another group was stirring plesiosaurs. These creatures took a different path. Where ichthyosaurs were built for speed, many plesiosaurs seemed to favor control. Their bodies were wide and barrel-chested. Some had short necks and long jaws perfect for ambush. Others, like the iconic Elasmosaurus, stretched their necks to extremes, bearing more vertebrae than a giraffe. Whether they used these necks like cranes to snatch prey from schools or as lures in still water is still debated. No modern animal has such a form, so comparison falters. Both groups swam the seas for over 100 million years, and for a time they seemed unchallenged. But the Earth does not promise permanence. In the late Cretaceous, a new predator arrived. Not a fish, not a shark, not even a true reptile in the traditional sense. It was a lineage of monitor lizards, returning to the sea with jawlines packed in daggered teeth. the Mosasaurs. We cannot be sure how swiftly they took control. The fossil record shows overlap, but not always clarity. What we do see is expansion. From coastal shallows to inland seas, Mosasaurs surged into every niche. They grew large, then larger. One genus, Mosasaurus, may have reached 17 meters. A predator of this size leaves behind little doubt. The sea now had teeth. Their skulls reveal a terrifying precision. Rows of recurved teeth, conical and sharp, designed not for chewing but for gripping slippery prey. Some species even possessed a second set of teeth on the palate, angled backwards, ensuring that once a fish or ammonite was caught it could not escape. The jaws could hinge wide, powered by muscles that suggest a bite force beyond anything we would wish to test. We cannot know the sound, but perhaps the water vibrated when they struck. Like their distant lizard kin, Mosasaurs still breathed air. They surfaced, gulped, and dove again. Their bodies, once sprawling and terrestrial, had reshaped into powerful swimmers. The limbs morphed into paddles, each joint stiffened, until little trace of walking remained. Their tails, unlike those of ichthyosaurs, did not split into forks, but developed a downward bend. At the tip grew a fin, creating a powerful sculling organ that could drive them forward with speed. Reconstructions vary, yet the consensus leans toward an ability to pursue prey with frightening bursts. They were hunters. Inside their bones, we find echoes of growth rates. Some studies suggest mosasaurs grew rapidly, much like mammals and birds, rather than slowly as most reptiles do. If true, it hints at warm metabolisms, perhaps mesothermic, allowing longer chases in cooler seas. Still, we cannot be certain. Stable isotope analysis offers clues, but interpretation is slippery. The chemistry of ancient seas is never fixed, and the data bends with each correction. The ecological canvas of the Cretaceous seas becomes clearer with each discovery. Ichthyosaurs, long dominant, had begun to fade by this time. Their reasons for decline remain elusive. Was it competition with newly evolving predators like mosasaurs? Or changing ocean chemistry? Or a slow collapse of food sources such as ammonites? Each hypothesis carries weight, but none yet holds the crown. Plesiosaurs endured alongside the mosasaurs, though perhaps relegated to specialized niches. The ocean was crowded. Yet in this crowd, mosasaurs rose quickly to the apex. One cannot ignore the diversity within their ranks. Some were built slender, ideal for darting after fish. Others were massive, their skulls blunt and deep, capable of tackling prey nearly their own size. Bite marks on ammonite shells, tooth scars in turtle carapaces, and even bones of other mosasaurs inside fossilized stomachs reveal a picture of opportunistic carnivory. Nothing was safe. Even members of their own kind could fall victim. Cannibalism is not pleasant to imagine, but the evidence does not let us look away. Still, we must resist the temptation to paint mosasaurs only as monsters. They were living animals, shaped by the same pressures that shape all life. Mothers bore young at sea. Their bodies adapted for a world where land was no longer required. Some must have died in shallow waters, stranded by tides or storms. Others likely carried parasites, healed from wounds, or failed hunts. They were fearsome, yes, but also vulnerable. Every skeleton is a reminder that power never guarantees survival. What we cannot easily capture is the texture of their world. The seas of the Mesozoic were crowded not just with giants, but with countless small, darting forms. Shoals of fish shimmered like living clouds. Ammonites drifted in coils of armor, their tentacles probing the water. Sea turtles glided with quiet persistence, while sharks circled in the background. Against this backdrop, marine reptiles were not isolated spectacles. They were participants in a dynamic theatre where predator and prey were locked in constant negotiation. The evidence sometimes misleads. A skeleton preserved with another inside its ribcage tempts us to imagine a final meal. Yet scavenging can mimic hunting, and post-mortem currents can rearrange bones. A tooth lodged in an ammonite shell may mark predation, or it may mark an accident of a struggling animal brushing the hard surface. science thrives on these ambiguities. Each fossil is not a clear window, but a blurred lens through which we must peer carefully, resisting the urge to state certainty where none exists. Still, the larger pattern is difficult to deny. Across millions of years, 3 separate groups of reptiles abandoned land to master the sea. Ichthyosaurs streamlined themselves into fish-like rockets. Plesiosaurs spread their 4 paddle limbs into oars that no living creature quite matches. Mosasaurs twisted the body of a lizard into something vast and sleek, propelled by a crescent of tail. None were related closely, yet each found a solution to the same puzzle. Convergence, repeated and stunning, reminds us how powerful the lure of the ocean can be. Inside their diversity lie questions of coexistence. Did mosasaurs and plesiosaurs compete directly? The fossil record places them side by side, but not always in the same niches. Plesiosaurs with long necks may have snatched small fish and squid, while short-necked plesiosaurs tackled larger prey. Mosasaurs, especially the largest, may have roamed more widely, chasing after turtles and ammonites in open water. Competition leaves faint marks, often invisible to stone. We can suspect overlap, but we cannot map every interaction. The extinction of these animals is easier to trace, though no less sobering. The end Cretaceous impact shattered the oceanic balance. Food webs collapsed from the bottom upward as plankton dwindled. With their prey in crisis, the great reptiles followed. Mosasaurs, despite their adaptability, vanished entirely. Plesiosaurs too disappeared, their long dynasty ending abruptly. Only turtles, crocodilians, and sharks persisted in the large reptilian ranks of the sea. And yet the story of return did not end. Within a few million years, mammals such as whales began their own journey back into the water, echoing the same experiment yet again. In their silence, the fossils still suggest wonder. Each bone tells us that life is restless. It leaves the land, it fills the skies, it dives into the oceans. It reshapes itself to meet new challenges, and sometimes it fails. The ichthyosaurs, the plesiosaurs, and the mosasaurs are no longer with us, but their shadows stretch across modern seas. Every dolphin leap, every penguin dive, every shark cutting through the surf is a faint reminder of those vanished architects of the deep. The echoes of the sea do not fade before another rhythm begins on land. With each passing million years of the Cretaceous, a quieter but relentless contest was unfolding across forests, floodplains, and open plains. It was not fought with sudden cataclysm, but with slow escalation. Herbivores grew bulkier, stranger, and more heavily defended. Predators sharpened their senses and tools to match. The arms race stretched long and silent, sculpting ecosystems into something intricate and fragile. Among the most iconic were the ankylosaurs. At first glance, they resemble tanks with tails. Low to the ground, covered in osteoderms, bony plates fused into their skin, they carried fortresses on their backs. Some species bore tail clubs, as heavy as sledgehammers, a weapon capable of breaking the bones of attacking theropods. But armor is not cheap. To grow so much bone required immense energy, and their digestive systems had to process huge amounts of plant matter to support it. We can only imagine how slowly they moved, how carefully they foraged, and how tense each encounter with a predator might have been. Close relatives, the nodosaurs, lacked the clubs but developed spines and ridges. These protrusions may have discouraged attacks or made them appear larger. Fossils of their stomach contents show ferns, cycads, and flowering plants. They were selective grazers, and in their caution they shaped the vegetation of the Cretaceous. Even in death, they remind us of their defenses. One spectacular specimen, preserved in fine detail, shows armor plates intact, skin impressions still wrapped around the body. It looks as though the creature might rise again, armor catching the light. Elsewhere, ceratopsians found a different solution. Their bodies grew massive, their skulls expanded into broad frills, and horns sprouted above their eyes and noses. Triceratops is the most famous, but it was one of many. Some species had long, blade-like horns. Others grew elaborate, scalloped frills. Debate continues as to what these structures were for. Evidence of bone lesions suggests they locked horns with each other, jousting not unlike deer or antelope today. Whatever their role, they created a new vocabulary of survival, one that blended weaponry with communication. The hadrosaurs, the so-called duck-billed dinosaurs, followed yet another path. They grew in herds, relying not on armor or horns but on numbers and complex behaviors. Their teeth formed batteries, hundreds of grinding surfaces packed into their jaws, perfect for processing tough plant matter. Some had dramatic crests on their skulls, hollow tubes that may have functioned as resonating chambers. CT scans suggest they could produce low, booming calls, carrying over long distances. A single voice meant little, but a chorus of thousands moving together would have been overwhelming. A defense built on unity. Against these defenses, predators refined their craft. Theropods grew keener senses, stronger claws, and more advanced hunting strategies. The balance was fragile, each adaptation pushing the other side to adjust. The arms race never stopped. The fossil record suggests that predators were not simply brutes relying on raw power. Evidence from bone structure and trackways hints at a range of behaviors, some cooperative, some solitary. Tyrannosaurus rex, often imagined as a singular terror, shows traits suggesting a more complex life. Its sense of smell was among the most advanced of any known dinosaur, inferred from the size of its olfactory bulbs. Its vision was likely excellent, binocular and keen, capable of tracking movement even at a distance. Its bite force has been reconstructed at levels beyond modern crocodiles, enough to crush bone. Yet toothwear shows that T-Rex sometimes consumed carcasses, scavenging as well as hunting. The truth is nuanced. Apex predators rarely specialize in only one behavior. Other theropods developed very different strategies. Dromaeosaurs, or raptors, evolved light, agile frames and sickle-shaped claws. Some specimens preserve quill knobs, evidence of feathers. Their arms and tails suggest exceptional balance and precision. They may have hunted smaller prey in packs, or perhaps were opportunistic ambush predators. Behavior is notoriously hard to infer from fossils. Bite marks and trackways offer glimpses, but these interpretations shift as new discoveries emerge. Still, their anatomy speaks of speed and intelligence, qualities necessary for thriving among heavily armored herbivores. Predator and prey dynamics shaped every level of the ecosystem. Herbivores grew large, partly to deter attacks. Sauropods persisted into the Cretaceous, though no longer dominating every continent. Some evolved new defenses, like tail spikes and heavy body mass, but others relied on sheer size. Nests discovered in South America showed dozens of eggs laid in open ground. This strategy, known as R-selection, relied on producing many offspring, with the understanding that only a few would survive. Predator footprints around these nesting sites suggest that many did not. Life in the Cretaceous was a constant test of numbers, speed, and adaptability. Even plants influenced this arms race. The spread of flowering plants, or angiosperms, during this period altered diets and habitats. Fossilized dung and stomach contents indicate that some herbivores adapted quickly, feeding on new vegetation that grew faster and spread more widely than cycads or ferns. This change likely affected predator strategies as well, since the movement of prey dictated hunting patterns. A shift in flora could ripple through the entire system, demonstrating how fragile even the mightiest creatures were to environmental change. Armor was not the only form of protection. Many herbivores likely lived in large herds, as suggested by fossilized trackways preserving hundreds of footprints moving together. Safety in numbers is an old strategy, and one that appears repeatedly across evolutionary history. Such herds would have been a spectacle, a living wall of bodies moving as one. A predator would need exceptional strategy to isolate a target, and many probably failed. In the silence of fossils, we can only imagine the tension of those encounters. Every adaptation carries a cost. Armor demands energy to grow and maintain. Horns and frills require nutrients, time, and space, yet they provide no guarantee of survival. Even speed and agility come with trade-offs in energy use and body design. The Cretaceous landscape was not simply a stage for dramatic battles. It was a complex web where each trait was balanced against risk, climate, and competition. Predators, in turn, faced their own challenges. A failed hunt wasted energy. A broken tooth or injured limb could mean starvation. Fossilized injuries on skeletons reveal healed fractures and tooth marks, proof that both hunters and hunted endured constant trials. Trackways and bone beds offer glimpses into herd dynamics. Some sites preserve thousands of hadrosaur footprints moving together in parallel lines, perhaps migrating between feeding grounds. Others show evidence of predator ambushes near river crossings, an age-old hunting tactic still seen today. Herding may have been a powerful defense, but it also made prey predictable, shaping the tactics of predators that stalked them. The spread of flowering plants added layers of complexity. As angiosperms evolved, they attracted pollinators, insects, and small vertebrates, creating new food sources and microhabitats. Herbivores adapted to this changing diet with more efficient grinding teeth and broader foraging behaviors. Predators followed these shifts indirectly, as prey diets and ranges influenced hunting grounds. The Cretaceous was not static. Every few million years brought a different balance of plant life, altering the shape of entire ecosystems. Fossil pollen and plant impressions in ancient sediments serve as reminders that dinosaurs lived in worlds rich with seasonal color, canopy structure, and diversity we can only guess at. Even social behaviors left traces. Bone beds of ceratopsians reveal groups of individuals preserved together, some possibly family units. The presence of young among these remains suggests complex group structures. Whether these herds cared for their young or simply moved as a collective is uncertain, but they were far from solitary. Predator fossils, too, show evidence of social interactions. Multiple Tyrannosaurus footprints found at the same site raise questions about hunting in groups, though this remains debated. We must be careful not to project modern behavior onto extinct animals, but the clues invite curiosity. This long, quiet arms race shaped the final age of dinosaurs into a tapestry of adaptations. It was not just size or strength that determined survival, but flexibility and timing. The ecosystems of the Cretaceous were deeply interwoven. When one thread shifted, whether through climate change, vegetation shifts, or evolutionary innovation, the entire web trembled. It was a fragile balance, held together by millions of years of trial and error. Each species an answer to a challenge no longer visible, but still etched into stone. Each fossil site we uncover shows that ecosystems were not rigid, but resilient in surprising ways. Dinosaurs evolved alongside countless insects, mammals, and early birds, all woven into the same networks. The smallest shifts, like the spread of flowering plants or new predator behaviors, could ripple through food chains, altering the future in ways no single species could predict. In this intricate world, survival was never static, and evolution was always at work, shaping creatures that would dominate until the sudden end of their reign. But even as predators sharpened their claws and herbivores fortified their armor, a quieter revolution was beginning beneath their feet. The forests and plains of the Cretaceous were shifting, and the true architects of that transformation were neither dinosaur nor reptile. They were plants. What sparked the sudden rise of flowering plants, or angiosperms, remains one of paleobotany's greatest mysteries. Why did these delicate newcomers, with blossoms and fruits, suddenly overtake the towering conifers and cycads that had ruled for so long? The fossil record places their earliest appearances in the early Cretaceous, roughly 135 million years ago. At first, they were modest, tiny ground-hugging plants with flowers so small they could vanish in the palm of a hand. Yet within a relatively short geological window, they spread across continents, dominating habitats from wetlands to mountain slopes. Charles Darwin himself once referred to their sudden proliferation as an abominable mystery, a phrase still quoted today. We know more than Darwin did, but not enough. The speed of their rise is startling, even by evolutionary standards. Pollen grains, preserved in ancient sediments, provide a breadcrumb trail. They reveal early angiosperms thriving alongside ferns and gymnosperms, quietly carving a niche in ecosystems once considered stable. Molecular clocks, which estimate divergence times using DNA mutation rates, suggest their origins might have been earlier still, perhaps lurking in the understory, long before fossils reveal them. This gap between molecular data and rock records keeps scientists cautious. Did angiosperms truly appear suddenly, or had they been evolving in the shadows for millions of years? Their defining trait, the flower, is a structure of exquisite complexity. It is both a reproductive organ and a signal, designed to attract pollinators with color, scent, and nectar. Flowers allowed plants to form more direct relationships with animals, particularly insects, breaking the reliance on wind-based pollination that dominated earlier eras. Fossilized beetles, flies, and early bees from Cretaceous amber show adaptations for carrying pollen. These insects, in turn, found new food sources in nectar. The partnership between angiosperms and pollinators may have been the key to their explosive spread. Yet it is also possible that environmental upheavals, such as rising temperatures and shifting coastlines, gave these adaptable plants an edge over their slower-growing competitors. Seeds also played a role. Encased in fruit, they offered new strategies for dispersal. Dinosaurs may have swallowed fruits and carried seeds across great distances, while birds and mammals, small and marginal at this time, began contributing to the spread as well. Each relationship deepened the plant's ecological reach. Fossil evidence of gut contents shows intact seeds inside some herbivorous dinosaurs, supporting this theory. But here, too, uncertainty reigns. Did these animals intentionally eat fruit, or were seeds merely passengers in a broader diet? We cannot know for sure. What we do know is that the angiosperms were rewriting ecosystems, turning green landscapes into a mosaic of color and scent. Unseen for hundreds of millions of years, the spread of angiosperms was not only a triumph of reproduction, but a complete rewriting of ecological relationships. Fossil pollen records from the mid-Cretaceous show their presence in sediments far from their earliest origins, suggesting a rapid colonization of new environments. Within a few tens of millions of years, flowering plants transformed forests from the towering, monotonous gymnosperm canopies of earlier eras into layered habitats rich with undergrowth, blossoms, and seasonal changes. Yet even with these broad strokes, one question persists. Why did they spread so explosively compared to their predecessors? Some theories center on coevolution. The rise of angiosperms coincided with an increase in insect diversity, particularly pollinators like bees, beetles, and flies, preserved in amber from Burmese and Lebanese deposits. Amber fossils reveal minute details of these ancient creatures: pollen grains clinging to hairs, specialized mouthparts, and delicate wings frozen mid-beat. These insects did not merely stumble upon flowers. They evolved alongside them, forming symbiotic bonds that made both groups more successful. Whether insects drove angiosperm evolution or flowers shaped insect diversification remains a subject of debate, a spiral of influence that leaves no simple answer. Other factors may lie in physiology. Angiosperms tend to grow faster than gymnosperms, producing leaves more efficiently and recovering quickly from environmental stresses. Fossilized leaves from Cretaceous formations show higher vein density, a trait linked to rapid photosynthesis and greater adaptability. These advantages could explain their ability to outcompete older plant lineages, especially during times of environmental change. Yet this hypothesis is complicated by the patchy fossil record, which shows angiosperms thriving in some areas while gymnosperms remain dominant elsewhere. Evolution rarely acts in uniform patterns, and local climate, soil, and herbivore pressures would have influenced the outcome. Evidence from herbivore fossils suggests dinosaurs were part of this story too. Gut contents preserved in hadrosaur and ceratopsian specimens reveal seeds and leaves from flowering plants. It seems likely that dinosaurs were dispersing angiosperm seeds, much like birds and mammals do today. This would have given these plants an extraordinary edge, enabling them to spread far and wide. Still, it is unclear whether dinosaurs sought these plants out, or if they were incidental grazers. The fossil record offers no definitive behavior. It offers only glimpses. seeds in a ribcage, a jaw fragment with microscopic plant residue. Meanwhile, mammals, though small and largely nocturnal at this time, also benefited from this floral revolution. The abundance of seeds, fruits, and nectar provided new, energy-rich food sources, potentially fueling their gradual diversification. Some of the earliest evidence of placental mammals coincides with this botanical bloom, though causation remains speculative. Did angiosperms create the ecological conditions for mammalian success, or did mammals simply take advantage of an opportunity? The interplay between these groups is still being unraveled, layer by layer, from sediment and amber. Even the climate of the Cretaceous, already warm and dynamic, may have been influenced by angiosperm expansion. Plants play a crucial role in regulating atmospheric carbon dioxide, and a shift in global vegetation would have had far-reaching effects. Climate models attempt to recreate these interactions, but the uncertainties are large. We cannot reconstruct every feedback loop. What we can say is that angiosperms introduced change on a planetary scale, altering not only what grew on the ground, but the very chemistry of the air. The fossil record tells us that this botanical revolution unfolded unevenly across the continents. In some regions, gymnosperms held their ground for millions of years, forming towering forests where flowering plants were only scattered understory shrubs. In others, angiosperms became dominant far more quickly, covering landscapes with new textures of greenery and blossoms. This patchwork pattern makes it difficult to pinpoint a single cause for their success. Perhaps there was no single cause. Evolution often works through overlapping pressures, each small advantage compounding into something extraordinary. Flowers offered attraction. Fruits offered dispersal. Faster growth allowed them to recover quickly after storms, fires, or grazing. Together, these traits built resilience. But we must be cautious. The fossil record is biased toward places where sedimentation was favorable. Vast ecosystems may have risen and fallen without leaving a trace. Amber, with its delicate preservation of ancient life, gives us some of our best glimpses into this period. Trapped inside golden droplets of hardened resin are not just insects, but also fragments of flowers, petals, and even fungal spores clinging to pollinators. Some amber fossils show beetles with pollen grains stuck to specialized hairs, a sign of an already advanced relationship between insect and plant. These small, silent details reveal a world buzzing with activity, a network of interactions as intricate as any modern rainforest. Yet even with these windows, our understanding is partial. The story of angiosperm rise is as much absence as presence, shaped by what has not survived the passage of time. The influence of flowering plants extended well beyond insects and small mammals. Herbivorous dinosaurs were forced to adapt to new diets. Teeth evolved, jaw mechanics shifted, and digestive strategies changed. Hadrosaurs, with their complex dental batteries, could grind through fibrous vegetation, while ceratopsians browsed on a wider variety of plant matter than earlier herbivores. Some scientists believe that angiosperms, with their energy-rich fruits and seeds, introduced new dynamics into dinosaur ecosystems, possibly influencing reproductive cycles and migration patterns. These theories remain speculative, supported by indirect evidence like coprolites and tooth wear, but they hint at the deep ripple effects of this botanical explosion. The legacy of this transition is still with us. Today, flowering plants dominate almost every terrestrial biome, from alpine tundras to equatorial rainforests. Over 80% of plant species are angiosperms, their diversity staggering. The world we inhabit, the food we eat, the landscapes we admire, the perfumes and colours of gardens was shaped during this ancient chapter of Earth's history. Yet even now, the origin of their sudden rise resists easy explanation. Was it climate, insect partnerships, genetic innovation, or some combination of all three? Perhaps we will never isolate a single spark. What we can see clearly is the outcome. A planet forever transformed by blossoms. A Cretaceous world where the quiet rustle of petals foretold sweeping evolutionary change. The dinosaurs walked among flowers, mammals thrived under their shelter, and every future ecosystem carried their imprint forward. The rise of flowering plants created more than vibrant forests and new food sources. It also carved out opportunities for creatures that had spent millions of years in the background, scurrying unseen in the shadows of the giants. Beneath the towering herbivores and apex predators, life at a smaller scale was busy with its own quiet triumphs. These were the mammals, and though they lived in obscurity for much of the Mesozoic, their lineage was ancient, stretching back long before dinosaurs rose to power. How did these tiny survivors endure in a world dominated by reptiles, and what traces of their journey remain in the rocks? The roots of the mammalian story reach into the Triassic, long before the Cretaceous forests that now sheltered them. Their ancestors were the cynodonts, a group of synapsids that already showed hints of traits we now consider distinctly mammalian. Cynodont skulls reveal differentiated teeth incisors, canines, and molars, indicating a shift towards specialized diets. Their nasal cavities expanded, suggesting a greater reliance on breathing warm air, a possible sign of endothermy. These creatures, some no larger than a modern cat, hunted insects and small reptiles under starlight, laying the groundwork for mammals as we know them. Fossilized burrows from this era show they were already digging shelters, a behavior that likely helped them weather harsh climates and evade predators. Through the Jurassic and into the Cretaceous, mammals remained small, rarely exceeding the size of a badger. Their bones are fragile, often fragmentary, which makes reconstructing their diversity challenging. Yet each discovery paints a richer picture. Fossils of early multituberculates show rodent-like mammals with complex teeth adapted for gnawing vegetation, hinting at ecological roles similar to those filled by modern rodents. Other species were insectivores with sharp, shearing molars, while some developed gliding membranes, a daring innovation for such a dangerous world. They were not evolutionary dead ends but pioneers, each experiment contributing to the resilience of the lineage. Amber and fine-grained sedimentary rocks preserve extraordinary glimpses of these creatures. One fossil from the Yixian Formation in China shows a mammal, Repenomamus, large enough to prey on young dinosaurs, a reversal of the usual dynamic. These discoveries challenge the assumption that mammals were passive background players. They were adaptable, opportunistic, and inventive. Living in the undergrowth required more than physical adaptation. Behavior became a survival tool. The large eyes of many fossil species suggest nocturnality, a strategy that may have helped them avoid the daytime gaze of predatory theropods. Sensitive whiskers and acute hearing, inferred from skull structures, point to a world navigated through touch and sound rather than sight alone. Insects, seeds, and soft plants formed their diets, a quiet banquet that rarely fossilized. But what these bones do reveal is resilience. Through volcanic eruptions, shifting continents, and the constant threat of predation, mammals endured, carrying forward a legacy that would one day reshape the planet. The fossil record of these creatures is like a whisper compared to the booming echoes of dinosaurs. Their bones are small and fragile, often crushed under layers of sediment or overlooked entirely. Yet advances in paleontology have brought these whispers to life. Sites like the J-hole biota in China and the Morrison Formation in North America provide glimpses of early mammals in remarkable detail. Fine-grained volcanic ash has preserved fur imprints, delicate ear bones, and even stomach contents. These fossils allow us to trace a lineage that survived in the margins, thriving not through dominance, but through adaptation. Multituberculates, one of the longest-lasting mammal groups, offer a compelling example. They lived for more than 100 million years, spanning both the reign and the extinction of dinosaurs. Their teeth were their defining feature, arranged in complex rows that allowed for efficient grinding of seeds and plant material. Some species evolved prehensile tails and grasping feet, traits suggesting an arboreal lifestyle. The diversity of multituberculates was staggering, yet they are now completely extinct. Why such a successful lineage disappeared remains unclear. Perhaps competition with emerging rodents played a role, or environmental shifts after the end Cretaceous extinction forced changes they could not adapt to. What we know is that they persisted for longer than most mammal lineages alive today, a quiet testimony to resilience. Meanwhile, early marsupials and placental mammals were carving their own evolutionary paths. Fossils like Eomea, a tiny creature from the early Cretaceous, reveal features that place it near the base of the Eutherian family tree. Its skeleton shows adaptations for climbing, a flexible ankle joint, and a reproductive system that may have foreshadowed the extended pregnancies of modern placentals. Another fossil, Cynodelphis, represents one of the earliest known marsupials, also small and agile, with a lifestyle likely tied to forest undergrowth. These two lineages, marsupials and placentals, would eventually spread across the globe, but at this point, they were just beginning to branch apart. Their small size was not a disadvantage in this world dominated by reptiles. If anything, it was an advantage. They could hide in burrows, climb trees, and survive on diverse diets. The fine structure of their ear bones, separated and refined from jaw elements in their cynodont ancestors, gave them an extraordinary sense of hearing. This adaptation likely helped them hunt insects at night and avoid predators in the dark. Fossilized skulls confirm the presence of enlarged auditory bullae, evidence of their sensitivity to sound. Whiskers, inferred from nerve openings in their snouts, suggest a tactile world navigated by touch as much as by sight. Insects, seeds, fruits, and small vertebrates formed their diets, but fossilized coprolites tell only fragments of this story. Much of their behavior remains speculative. Still, these small mammals were no passive relics. They were innovators, experimenting with gliding, climbing, and digging. They laid the groundwork for future ecosystems, though at the time they lived unnoticed beneath the shadow of towering dinosaurs. As the Cretaceous forests thickened and flowers spread beneath towering conifers, these small mammals thrived quietly in the mosaic of habitats. They darted through fallen leaves, scurried along branches, and nested in burrows carved into soft earth. Their story is harder to trace than that of the giants above them. Most of their bones are smaller than a human fingernail, easily lost to time, yet paleontologists have learned to listen to the faintest signals. A single tooth, often no larger than a grain of rice, can reveal more about lineage and diet than an entire skeleton. Teeth are dense, resilient, and distinctive. They survive when other bones crumble, offering a thread that ties modern mammals back to their ancient kin. From these fragments, we piece together a surprising diversity. Some early mammals, like Volaticotherium, developed gliding membranes, experimenting with aerial travel tens of millions of years before bats. Others, such as Docofossa, were adapted for digging, with broad forelimbs and sprawling posture reminiscent of moles. Even in a world dominated by dinosaurs, mammals were already carving out specialized ecological roles. They were not simply waiting for their moment to shine after the mass extinction. They were innovating, exploring niches that reptiles rarely occupied, and building the evolutionary foundations that would later allow them to radiate across the globe. The skulls of early mammals tell us about their advanced senses. 3 tiny ear bones, the malleus, incus, and stapes, had fully separated from the jaw, a remarkable adaptation inherited from cynodont ancestors. Enlarged olfactory bulbs suggest that smell, too, played a crucial role in their lives. In the dark, under the forest canopy, hearing and scent perception mattered more than vision. Whisker pits in their snouts confirm a tactile sensitivity that helped them navigate complex environments under cover of night. Their reproductive strategies remain harder to decipher. Fossils rarely preserve soft tissues, so debates continue about when placental reproduction truly emerged. Some evidence points to marsupial-like strategies dominating the Mesozoic, with short gestation periods, and altricial young carried in pouches or hidden in nests. The discovery of Eomea in China, with features suggesting a primitive placenta, adds another layer to the discussion. Perhaps reproductive modes were already diverging, with marsupials and placentals experimenting side by side. Each discovery brings more nuance, but also new questions. Were these mammals already establishing the blueprint for the explosive diversification seen after the Cretaceous extinction? Or were they locked into survival mode, living from moment to moment in a hostile world? In many ways, these creatures shaped ecosystems invisibly. By eating seeds and insects, they influenced plant distribution and insect population dynamics. Their burrows aerated soil. Their small bodies were prey for countless reptiles, birds, and larger mammals, forming the foundation of food webs. Though their presence was subtle, their role was essential. They were not giants, but they were architects of stability, helping maintain ecosystems during an era of intense evolutionary arms races above them. Their fossils remind us that survival is not always a story of dominance. Sometimes it is about endurance, subtlety, and the ability to adapt in silence. When the asteroid struck at the end of the Cretaceous, it was not sheer luck that allowed mammals to endure. It was the millions of years of evolution spent perfecting these quiet survival strategies. But even as mammals perfected their survival strategies beneath the ferns and flowers of the Cretaceous, the very stage they lived upon was shifting underfoot. Continents, oceans, and skies were changing in ways no creature could perceive within a lifetime, yet the slow rhythm of these transformations reshaped entire ecosystems. How did these shifts in temperature, sea level, and geography sculpt the fate of life on Earth? The Mesozoic climate was warmer than today, yet it was not uniform. During the Triassic and Jurassic, lush forests extended far into polar regions, supported by higher levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide. There were no permanent ice caps, and shallow seas flooded low-lying land. But in the Cretaceous, the Earth's surface entered a dynamic period of flux. Continental drift split Pangaea apart, creating isolated landmasses that drifted toward their present positions. Each continent carried with it a distinct evolutionary path, and the isolation of species on these islands of land drove bursts of diversity. Fossils from South America, Asia, and Europe show unique assemblages of dinosaurs and plants, evidence of ecosystems shaped as much by tectonic movement as by competition. Inland seas were another hallmark of this era. The Western Interior Seaway, a vast body of water cut through North America, dividing it into eastern and western landmasses. Sediments from its shores preserve fossils of marine reptiles, giant fish, and seabirds, alongside the footprints of dinosaurs that walked the coastlines. This seaway, at times more than 1,000 kilometers wide, was a barrier and a corridor all at once. It separated populations, driving evolution through isolation, yet it also allowed marine life to flourish deep within the continent. These shifting coastlines created complex ecological mosaics, and life adapted in ways that remain etched in the fossil record. Global sea levels rose and fell repeatedly throughout the Mesozoic, driven by tectonics, ocean circulation, and possibly fluctuations in polar temperatures. The rise of flowering plants may have influenced atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, though the exact extent is debated. Some models suggest a gradual cooling trend near the end of the Cretaceous, with more pronounced seasons and regional climate variation. This may have influenced the distribution of dinosaurs, as some species are found in polar deposits, evidence that at least some were capable of surviving in cooler, darker environments. Tracks from Australia's Cretaceous strata show herds of herbivores and predators living at high latitudes, where months of winter darkness tested their physiology. Whether they migrated seasonally or endured harsh conditions remains an open question. Volcanic activity also played a role. Large igneous provinces, such as the Ontong Java Plateau and Deccan Traps, released massive amounts of greenhouse gases, periodically altering the climate. These eruptions left chemical signatures in ocean sediments, providing evidence of warming events and disruptions in marine ecosystems. Life persisted through these fluctuations, but every shift created opportunities and vulnerabilities, shaping evolution in subtle ways that would become crucial when catastrophe struck at the end of the Cretaceous. Evidence from ancient rocks shows that these climatic changes were not gradual ripples, but dynamic events that reshaped ecosystems repeatedly throughout the Mesozoic. Sediment layers rich in oxygen isotopes reveal oscillations in ocean temperature, while chemical markers like carbon isotopes indicate dramatic shifts in carbon cycles. These changes were global but uneven. Some regions experienced long periods of warmth, while others faced seasonal extremes. Inland seas advanced and retreated, sometimes over vast areas within a few million years, leaving behind fossilized shorelines and marine deposits far from today's coasts. Each fluctuation created opportunities for some species, while dooming others. The Western Interior Seaway offers a clear example of this instability. Fossils from its ancient beds show ecosystems dominated by marine reptiles, ammonites, and fish that thrived when the sea was deep and stable. But layers of sediment above and below those rich deposits tell a different story. Rapid sea level drops periodically isolated shallow basins, causing mass die-offs, and leaving behind evaporite minerals that speak of arid conditions. These oscillations are recorded like pages in a book, a reminder that the world of the dinosaurs was anything but static. Evolution often accelerates in such fractured environments. Isolated populations adapt to local conditions, producing bursts of diversity that can either fade quickly or establish entirely new lineages. Continental drift added another layer of complexity. As Pangaea fragmented, ocean currents shifted, altering rainfall patterns and temperature gradients. Some regions that had once been lush became deserts, while others experienced monsoon-like climates. Fossils of crocodilians and turtles in what are now polar deposits suggest warmer poles, but evidence of growth rings in their bones hints at seasonal stress, possibly tied to periods of reduced sunlight. This contrast reminds us that even in globally warm periods, local ecosystems could be harsh and demanding. The Earth's surface was a constantly rearranging puzzle, with life clinging to each shifting piece. Volcanism may have triggered some of these shifts. Large igneous provinces released greenhouse gases that warmed the planet, but their aftermath often led to cooling events, driven by aerosols reflecting sunlight. The Deccan Traps, though best known for their association with the end Cretaceous extinction, represent just one of many episodes where Earth's climate was reshaped by massive volcanic outpourings. Each eruption left chemical fingerprints in sediments and fossils, markers that scientists now trace with increasing precision. These layers tell a story of instability, one that may have created conditions for the extraordinary biodiversity of the Mesozoic. Inland seas, fluctuating coastlines, and shifting mountain ranges also influenced migration routes. Dinosaurs and other animals were not static. They responded to these environmental pressures by moving, adapting, or vanishing. The fossil record preserves traces of these journeys in trackways that stretch across ancient floodplains and in bone beds that reveal sudden die-offs, possibly from drought or flooding. What emerges is a portrait of a world constantly reshaped, where survival depended on adaptability and chance. The record of these climatic changes is written in stone, but its interpretation is far from simple. Each layer of sediment offers only a momentary glimpse, and piecing them together is like reconstructing a symphony from scattered notes. Fossilized pollen, isotopic ratios, and mineral deposits tell us when seas advanced or retreated, but they do not always explain why. The interplay between tectonics, volcanism, and atmospheric chemistry remains a puzzle with missing pieces. We can trace broad patterns, the mid-Cretaceous greenhouse conditions, the later cooling trends, and intervals of intense volcanism. But when we look closer, we find contradictions. Others, unexpectedly, suggest aridity in what should have been warm epochs. This patchwork makes it clear that global climate change is rarely uniform. It is a mosaic, with each region responding differently to planetary forces. One of the most striking examples of this complexity comes from the fossil forests of Antarctica and Alaska. In the Cretaceous, these regions were well within the polar circle, yet tree rings from fossilized trunks show evidence of dense forests that endured months of winter darkness. Growth rings reveal seasonal variation, but not the kind we associate with icy poles today. These plants adapted to a world where temperature was not as extreme as sunlight availability. Dinosaurs lived here too, their bones found in layers that speak of seasonal migration or remarkable cold tolerance. How they survived such long winters remains an open question. Perhaps they hibernated or slowed their metabolism, Or maybe they simply endured. Inland seas, like the Western Interior Seaway, acted as climatic engines, influencing regional weather patterns. Their vast surfaces absorbed sunlight, moderated temperatures, and created humid environments that shaped ecosystems for thousands of kilometers inland. Yet their expansion and retreat left behind cycles of abundance and scarcity. Marine fossils tell of thriving ecosystems during high sea levels, followed abruptly by mass die-offs when coastlines shifted. This instability drove evolution in bursts, creating opportunities for new species while sealing the fate of others. Trackways of dinosaurs along former shorelines show evidence of adaptation to these changes, while sudden layers of marine deposits over terrestrial sediments tell stories of catastrophic flooding events. The rise of flowering plants may also have influenced global systems. Their rapid expansion altered atmospheric carbon levels and contributed to soil development, possibly amplifying feedback loops in the climate. Insects, birds, and mammals evolved alongside them, creating more dynamic ecosystems that were themselves sensitive to environmental shifts. As new plant life spread, it may have helped regulate temperature, stabilize riverbanks, and create microclimates that sheltered animals. But these benefits were balanced by volatility. New habitats created new vulnerabilities, and extinction events are often found layered beside bursts of diversification. By the late Cretaceous, the Earth had become a world of contrasts. Tropical seas lapped at continental interiors, while volcanic activity darkened skies elsewhere. Dinosaurs, reptiles, and early mammals navigated a constantly shifting stage, where survival was often dictated not just by teeth or claws, but by the ability to adapt quickly to changing seasons and landscapes. These fluctuations foreshadowed the cataclysm to come, but even without that asteroid, Earth was already a place of profound instability, a planet in motion, shaping the future with every shifting tide. As continents shifted and seas rose and fell, the world above the canopy was changing too. Among the branches, a quiet transformation was underway, one that would blur the line between dinosaurs and birds. How did feathers, once simple filaments, become the wings that carried life into the skies? The story begins deep within the theropod lineage, among small, agile predators that hunted in forests and floodplains. Fossils from China's Liaoning province provide extraordinary detail, revealing dinosaurs like Sinosauropteryx covered in a halo of downy filaments. These primitive feathers, simple and hair-like, were likely used for insulation rather than flight. They suggest that feathers evolved not as tools for the sky, but as adaptations for warmth and display, traits that helped creatures regulate their temperature and communicate. This insight comes from fossils so well preserved that individual melanosomes, the pigment structures in feathers, can be studied. From these microscopic clues, scientists have even inferred colors, rich chestnut reds, muted blacks, and striped tails that hint at a vibrant, visual world we can only imagine. Then came creatures like Microraptor, a small, four-winged dinosaur with flight feathers on both its arms and legs. Its fossilized remains, complete with fully articulated feathers, show a creature capable of gliding between trees, perhaps ambushing prey from above. Whether Microraptor could achieve true powered flight remains debated, but its anatomy demonstrates that flight did not appear suddenly. It was a mosaic of adaptations: long, asymmetrical feathers for lift, lightweight bones, and strong pectoral muscles that evolved step by step. Each new fossil adds a layer to this picture, challenging the idea of a clear boundary between dinosaurs and birds. Archaeopteryx, first discovered in Germany in the 1860s, was for over a century considered the earliest bird. Its skeleton combines features of both worlds: sharp teeth, clawed fingers, and a long, bony tail paired with flight feathers nearly identical to those of modern birds. Early debates questioned whether Archaeopteryx could truly fly or if it merely glided, but recent studies suggest it was capable of at least short bursts of powered flight. The limestone slabs that preserve these iconic fossils also capture delicate feather impressions, some of the first evidence that flight had ancient roots. These fossils were revolutionary in their time, offering a direct link between dinosaurs and birds, yet we now know they are part of a broader story. The evolution of feathers was not linear. Some theropods developed elaborate plumes on their arms and tails, likely for mating displays. Others had complex feather arrangements without any apparent adaptations for flight. This diversity suggests feathers were first a tool for survival and signaling, only later co-opted for flight. Even today, modern birds retain this duality. Feathers remain as important for communication and insulation as for flight itself. The first wing beats, then, were not an invention of necessity alone, but the result of millions of years of experimentation. The discoveries from Liaoning were only the beginning. Each new fossil unearthed from these fine-grained lake beds added complexity to the evolutionary picture. Dinosaurs, once imagined as cold-blooded, scaly giants, were now revealed as warm-blooded, feathered animals, some small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. Many specimens showed complex feather arrangements, with layered contour feathers overlapping downy insulation beneath, patterns nearly indistinguishable from those of modern birds. This evidence challenges the sharp divide that once existed between birds and non-avian dinosaurs, suggesting instead a continuum of traits evolving over tens of millions of years. Take Anchiornis, a small feathered dinosaur with impressions so detailed that individual feathers and their orientation can be reconstructed. Some of these fossils even preserve pigment structures, allowing scientists to infer that Anchiornis likely sported black and white plumage with a chestnut crest. These discoveries transformed our understanding, revealing that color and pattern were important even in early dinosaurs, possibly for display or camouflage. Such findings shift the narrative from feathers as purely functional adaptations to tools of social interaction, courtship, and recognition long before they allowed sustained flight. The path toward powered flight was likely a gradual and experimental process. Fossils of creatures like Rhonavis and Xiaotingia show a mix of features, including strong flight muscles and feather arrangements optimized for lift, but also primitive skeletal elements. These transitional forms suggest that gliding and flapping evolved side by side in different environments. Forested landscapes may have favored gliding species, while open areas selected for stronger flapping capabilities. This mosaic evolution complicates attempts to pinpoint a single first bird. Archaeopteryx retains its iconic status because it was the first such fossil discovered, but its anatomy is only one snapshot in a much broader story. The debate over how flight began remains one of paleontology's most enduring puzzles. Was it a trees-down model, where small dinosaurs used gliding as a stepping stone to powered flight, or a ground-up model, where strong legs and running speeds allowed dinosaurs to leap into the air and gradually evolve greater lift? Evidence supports both hypotheses, and it is possible that flight evolved differently in multiple lineages. Microraptor, with wings on all four limbs, suggests that some animals experimented with unique aerial strategies, demonstrating that evolution does not always follow a single path. Modern imaging technology adds new layers to this story. Synchrotron scans and high-resolution CT imaging allow scientists to examine fossilized feather shafts, bone structure, and even soft tissue remnants in microscopic detail. These studies confirm that the arrangement of tendons and muscles in early birds resembles that of their modern descendants. Yet they also highlight differences, such as the presence of long, bony tails and claws on wings. Birds, as we know them, were still a work in progress during the Cretaceous, and each fossil offers a piece of that ongoing puzzle, showing us a dynamic interplay between form, function, and environment. The picture that emerges from these fossils is not one of a sudden leap into the sky, but of experimentation unfolding over millions of years. Early theropods were light, fast, and already adapted for a dynamic lifestyle, with strong hind limbs and sharp senses. Feathers, at first simple filaments, may have helped maintain body heat or offered a visual signal to mates and rivals. Over time, they grew longer and more complex, developing asymmetry that improved their aerodynamic properties. Fossils of Caudipteryx and Protarchaeopteryx show symmetrical feathers unsuitable for flight, hinting that display and insulation preceded any aerial advantage. Only later, in species like Archaeopteryx, do we see feathers shaped specifically for flight. This slow transformation is not surprising. Evolution is rarely direct. Instead of a single missing link, we find a branching tree, with species occupying every stage between dinosaur and bird. Some retained teeth, others kept long bony tails, while still others had fully fused wing bones. The combination of traits makes classification challenging. Are creatures like Anchiornis true birds or non-avian dinosaurs that happen to resemble them? Even experts debate these definitions, and the line separating dinosaurs from birds continues to blur as new fossils surface. The diversity of these early birds is striking. Fossil beds from the early Cretaceous preserve Enantiornithes, a now extinct group of birds with claws on their wings and teeth in their beaks, features that would vanish in later avian lineages. Alongside them were primitive members of the Ornithuromorpha, closer to modern birds, already showing skeletal adaptations for efficient flight. These groups shared the skies for tens of millions of years, evidence that early birds were not a monolithic lineage, but an evolving community of species, each exploring different ecological roles. Feathers themselves reveal a surprising story. The arrangement of pigment-bearing melanosomes provides clues not only to colour, but also to feather strength. In some species, feathers were dark and reinforced, suggesting they were adapted for repeated stress during flight. Others may have displayed iridescent or patterned plumage, turning the forests of the Mesozoic into a visual tapestry. Fossilized skin and feather impressions show that some birds even possessed ornamental crests or elongated tail plumes, much like peacocks today. Beauty and survival were intertwined long before humans admired birds in flight. These evolutionary advances coincided with environmental changes. The spread of flowering plants and new insect species created ecosystems that rewarded small, mobile predators and foragers. Birds capitalized on these niches, becoming pollinators, seed dispersers, and insect hunters. Their ability to move quickly between habitats gave them an advantage over many reptiles, and this adaptability would be crucial when the asteroid struck at the end of the Cretaceous. While most dinosaurs perished, birds endured, carrying forward the legacy of their feathered ancestors. Modern birds are not simply descendants of dinosaurs, they are dinosaurs, representing a lineage that never truly disappeared. Every feather, from the down of a chick to the iridescent flight feathers of a hummingbird, carries echoes of this deep history. The forests that once held Microraptor's glides and Archaeopteryx's cautious flaps are long gone, but their legacy lives in every wingbeat. The sky, once claimed by pterosaurs, became the domain of birds, a triumph born not of sudden transformation, but of countless small changes written into stone and bone. The sky may have belonged to birds, but on the ground, new giants emerged. These were predators that defined the final chapter of the dinosaur age, towering hunters whose very bones speak of speed, strength, and dominance. What made creatures like Tyrannosaurus rex so successful, and how did they rise to become apex predators of their time? The late Cretaceous was a period of extraordinary diversity, and ecosystems teemed with massive herbivores that offered an abundance of prey. Into this world came the Tyrannosaurids, a family of theropods that evolved from relatively small, long-armed ancestors. Early members like Dilong, discovered in China, were no larger than a dog and were covered in simple feathers, evidence that even the fiercest predators had humble beginnings. Over millions of years, these small-bodied hunters transformed into towering carnivores. By the time of T. Rex, around 68 to 66 million years ago, they had become the uncontested rulers of North America's food chain, stretching over 12 meters in length and weighing more than 6 tons. The fossil record reveals that T. Rex and its relatives were not just enormous, they were finely tuned predators. The skull of T. Rex is a masterpiece of engineering, with fused nasal bones and a deep structure that could withstand forces far beyond those of most animals. Bite force estimates suggest it could crush bone with a pressure exceeding that of modern crocodiles. Fossilized bite marks on Triceratops frills and Edmontosaurus bones confirm this destructive capability. Yet their teeth, thick and serrated, were not merely weapons for killing. They were also designed for slicing and breaking bones to access the nutrient-rich marrow inside. Evidence of their senses paints a picture of extraordinary hunters. The forward-facing eyes of tyrannosaurs gave them exceptional depth perception, and studies of their olfactory bulbs show they had an acute sense of smell, rivaling or surpassing that of today's vultures. This would have allowed them to track prey over long distances or scavenge carcasses hidden from sight. Their inner ear structures suggest they were well adapted for balance and coordination, traits essential for an animal with a massive head balanced over muscular hind limbs. Despite their size, these predators grew quickly. Bone histology reveals growth rings similar to those in trees, and studies of juvenile skeletons show that tyrannosaurs experienced growth spurts during adolescence, reaching adult size within 2 decades. Juveniles were more lightly built, with longer legs and narrower skulls, possibly filling different ecological roles than adults. This division of labor within a single species may have reduced competition and allowed T. rex populations to thrive in complex environments. Pack behavior remains a debated topic. Fossil trackways from other tyrannosaur species, like Albertosaurus, suggest that they may have hunted in groups, or at least traveled together. Whether these were coordinated hunting packs or temporary family units is uncertain. What we do know is that tyrannosaurs were more than solitary ambush predators. They were dynamic, adaptable, and intelligent enough to dominate ecosystems in ways no other predator of their time achieved. The rise of tyrannosaurs was not an overnight event, but the result of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. Their ancestors were slender, long-armed predators, closer in appearance to other coelurosaurs than to the muscular giants of the late Cretaceous. Fossils from Asia, such as those of Dilong and Yutyrannus, reveal early tyrannosaurs that were feathered, agile, and relatively small, suggesting that the lineage may have begun as nimble hunters rather than colossal apex predators. Over time, they evolved massive skulls, shorter arms, and stronger neck muscles, changes that reflected a shift in hunting style and feeding strategies. This transformation was not linear, and different tyrannosaur species across Asia and North America show a patchwork of traits, hinting at a complex evolutionary path shaped by geography and climate. Studies of their growth reveal that tyrannosaurs experienced a dramatic acceleration during adolescence. Bone histology shows rapid deposition during these years, with individuals doubling or even tripling in size in a matter of a few years. This growth spurt allowed young tyrannosaurs to quickly transition from mid-sized predators to towering giants capable of challenging any creature in their ecosystem. Juvenile specimens, like Jane the juvenile T. rex at the Burpee Museum, offer a rare window into this period of life. Their lighter build and more slender jaws suggest they occupied a different niche than adults, hunting smaller, faster prey, perhaps in forested areas. This division of ecological roles may have reduced intraspecific competition, allowing more tyrannosaurs to coexist in the same region. The sensory adaptations of tyrannosaurs were as impressive as their physical strength. CT scans of their skulls reveal a large olfactory bulb, indicating a highly developed sense of smell. This trait would have made them efficient scavengers as well as hunters, capable of detecting carcasses over great distances. Their forward-facing eyes provided binocular vision, a trait rare among large predators, allowing exceptional depth perception. This combination of senses suggests a predator that relied on both patience and precision, capable of ambushing prey or locating carrion with equal ease. Despite their fearsome appearance, evidence suggests tyrannosaurs were intelligent animals. The size of their brain relative to body mass indicates a level of cognition comparable to or exceeding that of modern reptiles. Endocasts of their brain cases show well-developed regions for sensory processing and motor control. Trackways and bone beds raise intriguing questions about their behavior. A site in Alberta preserves a group of Albertosaurus skeletons found together, leading some scientists to propose that tyrannosaurs may have lived in social groups, either as family units or coordinated hunting packs. However, others caution that these assemblages may represent natural disasters that buried unrelated individuals at once. Without definitive behavioral evidence, these debates remain open, but they illustrate that tyrannosaurs were far from simple, solitary killers. The ecosystems they inhabited were equally complex. The late Cretaceous of North America was a patchwork of coastal plains, floodplains, and inland seas, teeming with ceratopsians, hadrosaurs, and ankylosaurs. Tyrannosaurs were perfectly adapted to this environment, dominating the top of the food chain while coexisting with a wide array of herbivores that shaped their hunting strategies and physical evolution. The image of Tyrannosaurus rex as a lumbering brute has been steadily replaced by one of a complex predator. Its skeleton tells a story of balance and precision, with a long, heavy tail acting as a counterweight to its enormous head. Musculature reconstructions suggest surprising agility, especially for a creature weighing more than 6 tons. Regardless of its exact speed, Rex was fast enough to catch the large herbivores of its time, many of which relied on herds and defensive strategies rather than outrunning predators. Its strategy may have been one of calculated ambush rather than long pursuit, a conclusion supported by its robust build and powerful jaw mechanics. The arms of Tyrannosaurus, often mocked for their size, were not vestigial. Each arm was heavily muscled and capable of lifting several hundred kilograms, suggesting they played a role in mating displays, grappling prey, or aiding the animal as it rose from rest. The arms shrank relative to body size over evolutionary time, but their muscular structure indicates they were still functional tools rather than evolutionary leftovers. Fossilized tendons and attachment scars confirm the strength packed into these short limbs, adding another layer to our understanding of this predator. Bite marks on fossils provide a rare glimpse into tyrannosaur behavior. Some Triceratops skulls show healed wounds consistent with failed attacks, evidence that herbivores were not passive victims but capable of inflicting damage. There are also signs of cannibalism among Rex, with tooth marks on bones that match the animal's own dentition. Whether this behavior was the result of active predation or opportunistic scavenging is unclear. These clues suggest a predator willing to exploit any available resource, a trait that likely contributed to its resilience in late Cretaceous ecosystems. The sensory world of tyrannosaurs was likely rich and nuanced. Their vision was forward-facing and stereoscopic, giving them excellent depth perception. Their smell was acute, their hearing likely attuned to low-frequency sounds, and their intelligence sufficient to navigate complex environments. Some paleontologists have proposed that Rex may have used low rumbles to communicate over long distances, similar to modern crocodilians or elephants. Although this remains speculative, the possibility adds a new dimension to how we imagine these animals interacting with each other. By the final days of the Cretaceous, Tyrannosaurus rex ruled a landscape that was both lush and volatile, a world of coastal floodplains, towering conifers, and flowering plants teeming with prey. Its dominance was the product of countless evolutionary experiments, each adaptation sharpening its role as a hunter. When the asteroid struck 66 million years ago, this lineage, perfected over millions of years, vanished almost overnight. Yet every fossil, every tooth and bone bed speaks of an apex predator that shaped entire ecosystems. Tyrannosaurs were not merely giant killers. They were architects of balance in a world approaching its dramatic close, a lineage that embodied the power and fragility of life in equal measure. Even in the shadow of giants like Tyrannosaurus rex, the Mesozoic world was far from silent. The evidence we hold in fossils, bones, and sediment impressions cannot record sound directly, yet there are signs everywhere that this was a landscape rich with voices. How do we begin to reconstruct a soundscape that has been lost for over 66 million years? Paleontologists start with anatomy. The structure of skulls and the hollows within them offer clues about vocalization. In hadrosaurs, for instance, elaborate crests formed long, resonating tubes connected to their nasal passages. These crests, some longer than an adult human, may have functioned as natural brass instruments, amplifying deep calls that could carry across floodplains. Studies of these skulls, scanned and digitally modeled, suggest frequencies so low they may have been more felt than heard, similar to the rumbles of elephants today. This evidence implies a world where communication spanned great distances and where sound travelled across herds and forests as a low, vibrating hum. The syrinx, the vocal organ of modern birds, leaves no fossil record because it is made of soft tissue. Yet one remarkable discovery from Antarctica provides a clue. A fossil bird called Vegavis, dated to the end of the Cretaceous, preserves impressions of a syrinx in its throat, making it the earliest known example of this vocal structure. If birds were singing, it is not a stretch to imagine that their dinosaur ancestors were also experimenting with calls, honks, and hisses that would have filled the air. Dinosaurs were not alone in shaping the soundscape. Insects had already been evolving stridulation, the ability to produce sound by rubbing body parts together, for millions of years. Fossils of crickets and katydids with wing structures designed for sound production have been found from the Jurassic period. Reconstructions of their calls suggest frequencies similar to modern species, creating a backdrop of chirps and trills in the night. Frogs and early mammals likely added their voices too, though their sounds are lost to us. What emerges is a picture of a world alive with both music and noise, even if its symphony is only partially known. Color and sound may have been deeply linked. Fossil evidence of pigmentation in feathers and scales suggests that visual display was important for communication, and it is reasonable to infer that sound often accompanied these signals. A crest on a Parasaurolophus was not just for show, it may have reinforced its deep, resonant call. The bright plumes of feathered dinosaurs like Anchiornis likely worked alongside vocalizations, creating a sensory experience for rivals and mates. The fossil record is silent, and every sound we reconstruct is ultimately a scientific hypothesis, pieced together from structure and comparison rather than direct evidence. The ability to create and interpret sound is an ancient skill, deeply woven into the history of life. Crocodilians, the closest living relatives of dinosaurs, use low-frequency rumbles that can make water ripple. This comparison gives us reason to believe that dinosaurs, too, may have produced calls that resonated through their environment. The anatomy of their inner ears provides further clues. Studies of semicircular canals and cochlear length in fossil skulls show that many dinosaurs could hear low frequencies particularly well. In hadrosaurs, the inner ear was especially sensitive to sounds below the range of most modern birds, suggesting that these animals likely communicated in tones we would feel as vibrations more than hear as distinct calls. Bone crests and resonating chambers also provide a window into this soundscape. The elaborate cranial ornamentation of ceratopsians and lambeosaurines was not just for visual display. Many of these structures were hollow or connected to nasal passages, acting like natural megaphones. Parasaurolophus, with its dramatic curved crest, has been digitally reconstructed using CT scans, and these models indicate it could produce low, haunting calls that carried for kilometers. Herds of these dinosaurs may have used such calls to coordinate movement, warn of danger, or reinforce social bonds. This paints a vivid picture of late Cretaceous floodplains, echoing with deep, resonant sounds, layered over the rustle of vegetation and the distant calls of predators. Even predators like Tyrannosaurus rex may have used sound to communicate, not with high-pitched roars like those popularized in film, but with infrasound frequencies below human hearing. Such sounds could travel through dense forests and over long distances, allowing communication between individuals without revealing their presence to prey. This hypothesis remains speculative, but it is supported by comparisons with modern animals like elephants and crocodilians. These analogues remind us that nature often reuses strategies, and the world of dinosaurs may have been filled with communication beyond the range of our senses. Feathers add another layer to this sonic world. Fossils of feathered dinosaurs like Caudipteryx and Microraptor show evidence of structures similar to those in modern birds that produce sounds through feather vibration. Some birds, like manakins, use rapid wing beats to create buzzing or snapping noises, and it is possible that similar displays existed among their ancestors. Color reconstructions, based on melanosomes preserved in fossil feathers, suggest striking plumage that likely accompanied these sounds. The combination of color and noise would have created elaborate courtship rituals long before songbirds evolved their melodies. Insects and amphibians provided a constant chorus. Fossils of Jurassic crickets reveal wing structures nearly identical to those of their modern relatives, meaning their songs likely filled ancient nights with rhythmic chirps. Early frogs, their voices lost to time, likely added their own calls, creating a layered soundscape in wetlands and rivers. The first mammals, though small and nocturnal, may have contributed with high-pitched squeaks and ultrasonic communication. Even in darkness, this was a living, breathing world where sound stitched together the rhythms of life. Sound was not merely a tool for communication but a survival mechanism. Herbivores may have relied on alarm calls to warn herds, while predators used low rumbles to intimidate rivals. Hatchlings likely recognized the calls of their parents, a behavior seen in birds and crocodilians today. Every fossil that preserves a crest, a hollow bone, or an ear canal adds a note to this ancient symphony, allowing us to imagine a vibrant world where silence was rare and sound was as essential as sight and scent. Reconstructing this vanished soundscape requires imagination tempered by evidence. We cannot listen to a dinosaur, yet every feature of its skeleton offers subtle hints about the noises it may have made. The hollow bones of crested hadrosaurs tell us that their calls could resonate like foghorns across ancient wetlands. The deep chest cavities of large predators suggest lungs capable of producing vibrations powerful enough to shake the air. Even the structure of ear canals tells us these creatures were attuned to frequencies beyond our perception. In piecing together these details, we gain a sense of a world that was alive with communication, one that likely seemed louder and more layered than anything we know today. There is a temptation to imagine the Mesozoic as a silent realm punctuated only by roaring beasts. But modern ecosystems remind us that sound is an essential part of survival, not just a dramatic flourish. Forests hum with insects, frogs, birds, and mammals. Wetlands echo with the calls of herding animals. Savannas vibrate with low-frequency rumbles. There is no reason to think the Cretaceous was any quieter. Its wetlands and coastal plains would have carried sound over vast distances, creating a kind of auditory map that animals used to navigate and communicate. A predator's distant call may have warned herbivores long before the animal came into view. Color likely played a role in this acoustic world. Many dinosaurs evolved elaborate crests, frills, and feathers, often vividly pigmented. The fact that some of these structures were hollow or connected to nasal passages suggests they were not just visual ornaments, but part of multi-sensory displays. A Parasaurolophus may have paired its deep, trumpet-like call with a striking head crest, reinforcing its presence to rivals and mates. The feathered dinosaurs of the forests, with iridescent plumage, may have accompanied visual flashes with wing snaps and vocal trills, much like birds today. These complex communication strategies show that sound was intertwined with behavior and survival, shaping social hierarchies and reproductive success. The role of sound extended to parenting and kin recognition. Fossilized nesting grounds, such as those of Maiasaura, reveal evidence of strong parental care. It is likely that hatchlings communicated with their parents through calls, just as baby crocodiles and birds do today. Even in environments dominated by enormous predators, these delicate exchanges helped shape the rhythms of daily life. Insects, amphibians, and mammals formed a backdrop to this sonic drama, layering in chirps, croaks, and squeaks that filled the air at night. Bats had not yet appeared, but early mammals were already experimenting with high-frequency communication, perhaps ultrasonic. The result would have been a planet alive with voices, each species carving out its own auditory space. Though we will never truly hear this prehistoric symphony, fossils provide a sheet of music, and science offers a careful performance, reminding us that silence is rarely natural. Life has always found ways to sing. The symphony of life continued, but it was entering its final movement. In the last 2 million years of the Cretaceous, the Earth's ecosystems were thriving in ways that mask the fragility beneath. Diversity among dinosaurs reached its peak, with vast herds of ceratopsians roaming coastal floodplains, ankylosaurs lumbering through lowland forests, and duck-billed hadrosaurs grazing in immense numbers. Predators like Tyrannosaurus rex and Dacotaraptor stalked these herds, filling niches in finely balanced ecosystems. Yet for all this abundance, the late Cretaceous world was perched on a knife's edge, a system vulnerable to even minor disruptions. The fossil beds of western North America, especially the Hell Creek Formation, reveal a vivid picture of this age. These sediments, laid down in floodplains stretching from Montana to the Dakotas, capture a thriving ecosystem teeming with life. Triceratops, perhaps the most iconic of all ceratopsians, dominated these landscapes, its 3 horns and massive frill serving as both weapons and displays. Ankylosaurus, encased in bony armor with a tail club, exemplified the defensive strategies of herbivores. Duck-billed hadrosaurs, such as Edmontosaurus, formed immense herds, their social structures rivaling those of modern ungulates. Fossilized trackways and nesting sites hint at complex behavior, parents guarding eggs, herds migrating seasonally, and predators trailing them. Yet these ecosystems were patchworks of survival, delicately balanced by climate, geography, and food supply. The Western Interior Seaway divided North America, acting as both a corridor and a barrier. Coastal plains were lush, but inland environments were harsher, dotted with conifer forests, flowering plants, and open grass-like prairies. Plant-eating dinosaurs evolved specialized jaws and teeth to process tough vegetation, but this may have made them vulnerable to small shifts in plant availability. Triceratops, once thought to represent multiple species, now appears to have undergone dramatic physical changes during growth. Juveniles bore small horns and modest frills, while adults developed enormous, ornamented skulls. Some paleontologists believe these changes were part of visual communication, reinforcing social hierarchies within herds. Others suggest they were primarily weapons, used in ritual combat, much like modern bison clash during mating seasons. Healed injuries on skulls indicate these confrontations were common. The abundance of Triceratops fossils in Hell Creek sediments suggests they were among the most successful herbivores of their time, yet their dominance also signals declining diversity. In earlier periods, ceratopsians shared the stage with a variety of horned dinosaurs, but by the very end, Triceratops reigned alone. A similar pattern appears in Ankylosaurs. The mighty Ankylosaurus was one of the last of its kind, a heavily armored survivor from a once more varied lineage. Its massive tail club and bony plates were not evolutionary extravagance, but necessities in a predator-rich world. Tyrannosaurus remains frequently show bite marks from tail clubs and horns, indicating prey animals fought fiercely for survival. This paints a vivid image of an ecosystem locked in an arms race, where every adaptation was met by a counter-adaptation, and balance was maintained only through constant struggle. As we look closer at these late Cretaceous landscapes, their abundance begins to feel like a mirage. While dinosaur diversity was high, many lineages had narrowed into fewer species, and ecosystems became highly specialized. In North America, large ceratopsians like Triceratops and Torosaurus filled niches once occupied by a wider array of horned dinosaurs. Hadrosaurs dominated river valleys, their duck-billed jaws perfectly suited for stripping vegetation. Yet this success came at a cost. Highly specialized diets often make species more vulnerable to change, and fossilized plants suggest that vegetation was already shifting. Angiosperms had spread widely, reshaping ecosystems once dominated by conifers and cycads. The Western Interior Seaway, stretching from the Arctic to the Gulf of Mexico, created unique biomes along its shores. Coastal regions hosted a mix of marine reptiles, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs that hunted or scavenged along beaches. Inland, lush floodplains supported enormous herbivore herds, while drier uplands sheltered smaller species that rarely fossilized. This environmental patchwork offered stability but also created fragility. Species adapted to very specific environments and had little flexibility if climate or habitat shifted suddenly. Fossil evidence of declining diversity in some regions supports the idea that ecosystems were already under stress in the final million years of the Cretaceous, even if these stresses were not catastrophic on their own. Traces of fragility appear in bone beds where vast numbers of animals perished together. Some sites suggest droughts or seasonal flooding wiped out herds, leaving behind layers of bones that tell stories of struggle. Climate records drawn from oxygen isotopes in ancient shells indicate global temperatures were fluctuating, with periods of warming followed by cooling. Although these changes were gradual compared to the devastation that would follow, they may have pressured already specialized species. Plants, too, reveal instability. Fossil pollen studies show shifts in plant communities over short geological timescales, forcing herbivores to adapt quickly or risk starvation. Ceratopsians like Triceratops were still evolving rapidly during this time. Fossils from the youngest layers of the Hell Creek Formation show variations in frill shapes and horn structures, suggesting diversification even in their final chapter. Ankylosaurs and nodosaurs persisted alongside them, their armored hides and spiked tails reminders of the predator-prey arms race that defined the Cretaceous. Yet even these heavily defended creatures appear less abundant in the youngest layers, hinting that something was beginning to unravel. Whether this was due to environmental pressures, disease, or natural cycles of extinction is uncertain. Pterosaurs, once diverse, were reduced mainly to enormous asdarchids like Quetzalcoatlus. Birds had diversified into numerous forms, many filling ecological niches once held by smaller pterosaurs. Mammals, though small, were quietly expanding in diversity, exploiting opportunities left open by specialized dinosaurs. The world of the late Cretaceous was vibrant but shifting in ways that foreshadowed its imminent collapse. What seemed like dominance was, in many ways, a fragile equilibrium. In these final days of the Cretaceous, evolution seemed to be both accelerating and narrowing, producing iconic giants while thinning diversity beneath the surface. The fossil record reveals a few dominant herbivores and predators in North America, such as Triceratops, Edmontosaurus, Ankylosaurus, and Tyrannosaurus rex, while smaller species that once filled ecological roles were becoming rarer. Asia hosted its own thriving ecosystems, with titanosaurs, the rhizinosaurs, and the last of the small raptors. Yet even there, patterns suggest a focus on fewer, highly successful species. This concentration of life into fewer lineages is a red flag in evolutionary terms. Ecosystems that appear lush and vibrant are often the ones that collapse most quickly when stress is introduced. The climate of this era was warm, with no polar ice caps, but not entirely stable. Geological evidence points to volcanic activity in what is now India, where the Deccan traps were erupting intermittently, releasing massive amounts of gas into the atmosphere. These eruptions began before the asteroid impact, and may have altered climate in ways that stressed ecosystems. Oxygen isotope studies from marine fossils show fluctuations in sea temperatures, suggesting the environment was already experiencing subtle changes. Coastal regions were especially dynamic, as sea levels rose and fell, reshaping habitats and forcing migrations. Herbivores adapted to certain vegetation may have faced challenges when their food sources shifted, while predators were forced to travel farther to find prey. Despite these pressures, the diversity of life was astonishing. Giant azadarchid pterosaurs soared above floodplains, crocodilians lurked in waterways, and flowering plants carpeted the land, supporting a web of insects, mammals, and reptiles. Fossilized amber from this period captures snapshots of this richness, preserving ants, beetles, and even feathers in exquisite detail. The fact that these ecosystems appeared healthy right until the very end makes the coming extinction striking. There is no clear fossil evidence of a slow decline. Instead, the layers that follow the final Cretaceous strata tell of an abrupt and catastrophic shift. Some paleontologists argue that species were already stressed and fragmented, setting the stage for a rapid collapse, while others see no sign of major decline before the impact. The fossil record is patchy, and interpretations vary depending on location. What is clear is that this was a planet in transition, where ecological success carried a cost. Giant animals like Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus required immense resources to survive, making them highly sensitive to disruption. In contrast, smaller species, including birds and mammals, had flexibility on their side. This difference would prove decisive when disaster struck. For now, We imagine the final days as deceptively serene. Coastal floodplains alive with massive herds, predators patrolling ancient rivers, insects humming in forests of ferns and flowering plants. The earth was vibrant and full of life, but every balance is temporary. The curtain was about to fall, and the world that had belonged to the dinosaurs for over 160 million years was poised on the brink of its most dramatic transformation yet. The world was vibrant, but all its beauty hung by a thread, thinner than we can truly imagine. 66 million years ago, the balance of life that had sustained the dinosaurs for over 160 million years met a force it could not withstand. This story begins with a rock, roughly 10 kilometers wide, traveling faster than sound can carry a warning. It came from deep space, an asteroid or comet fragment whose origins are uncertain. What is certain is where it struck. The Yucatan Peninsula, in what is now Mexico, still bears the scar. The Chicxulub crater, more than 180 kilometers across, a wound in the Earth's crust that marks the exact moment everything changed. How do we grasp a disaster so sudden that it compressed extinction into a geological heartbeat? The evidence for this event is scattered across the planet. A thin layer of clay rich in iridium, a metal rare on Earth but common in asteroids, separates the last rocks of the Cretaceous from the first of the Paleogene. This iridium layer was the first clue that pointed scientists toward an impact event, though it sparked decades of debate before most accepted its implications. The crater itself was not definitively identified until the 1990s, buried beneath limestone and jungle. Drilling cores and geophysical surveys confirmed that a massive impact had vaporized rock, melted crust, and sent tsunamis racing across the world. The speed of the object at impact has been estimated at over 20 kilometers per second. In a fraction of a second, the kinetic energy released equaled billions of nuclear bombs. Reconstructions of the event show a world torn apart almost instantly. The asteroid punched through the Earth's crust, creating a transient cavity that collapsed into a peak ring crater. Shockwaves rippled through the planet, triggering earthquakes and landslides on a global scale. Vast plumes of molten rock were hurled skyward, raining down as fiery debris thousands of kilometers away. Within minutes, forests burned. Within hours, tsunamis hundreds of meters high devastated coastlines. The skies filled with superheated dust, soot, and sulfur aerosols, blocking sunlight and plunging the world into a sudden darkness. We infer these details from fractured quartz, from shocked minerals, and from microtectites, tiny glassy spheres formed when molten rock was flung into the atmosphere and cooled as it fell. These clues are scattered across the globe, in marine sediments, in river deposits, and in the crater's heart itself. Yet many aspects remain debated. How long did darkness last? How cold did the world become? Some models suggest months of near-total blackout, enough to halt photosynthesis and collapse food chains. Others propose slightly shorter winters, but devastating acid rain and climate oscillations. The Earth was plunged into a cascade of feedback loops that scientists are still piecing together. For the dinosaurs, there was no way to prepare. Herds that had grazed for generations suddenly faced a world without sunlight. Plants wilted, insects died, and herbivores starved. Carnivores followed soon after. The fossil record suggests that ecosystems collapsed within mere decades, a blink in geological time. This extinction event was not gradual, though it was not instantaneous either. It was a rolling catastrophe, wave after wave of devastation radiating out from ground zero. In the hours that followed the impact, Earth itself became a weapon. As molten rock rained back through the atmosphere, the friction heated it until it glowed like falling stars. This incandescent storm likely ignited vast stretches of vegetation, blanketing continents in wildfires that spread faster than any animal could outrun. Fossil charcoal found in sediments of this age suggests that fires were not isolated events, but near global infernos. Some scientists propose that the entire surface of Earth's forests burned, creating smoke thick enough to block out what sunlight remained. Much of the planet's biosphere may have been scorched within a single day. The oceans, too, were devastated. The shock of the asteroid impact generated waves hundreds of meters tall, Coastal regions, which hosted many of the richest habitats, were obliterated as tsunamis surged inland. Evidence from fossilized sediments shows layers of debris deposited by these waves as far away as North Dakota, over 2,000 kilometers from the impact site. It is hard to picture such violence, yet the rocks preserve this story clearly. Fish fossils entombed alongside plant material and glassy spherules of molten rock, all settled in chaotic layers that suggest a sudden flood. As the fires raged and tsunamis receded, the next phase of destruction began silently. Dust and aerosols thrown into the atmosphere formed a global shroud. Models suggest sunlight was blocked for months or years, plunging temperatures dramatically. Plants, already scorched, could no longer photosynthesize. Without plants, herbivores starved. Without herbivores, predators had no prey. This collapse cascaded upward through food webs, erasing some of the most successful species to have ever lived. Around 75% of all species are believed to have vanished in the aftermath. Some scientists believe the oceans suffered even more than the land. Plankton populations crashed, destabilizing marine ecosystems from the bottom up. Chemical evidence from deep-sea sediments suggests a dramatic acidification event, likely caused by sulfur aerosols mixing with water vapor to form acid rain. Coral reefs that had thrived for millions of years withered, and many marine reptiles disappeared entirely. Creatures like mosasaurs and plesiosaurs left no survivors. Even ammonites, once dominant in the oceans for hundreds of millions of years, vanished completely. Yet not everything died. Some groups, such as crocodilians, turtles, and early birds, managed to endure. Their survival tells us that ecosystems were not destroyed evenly. Small size, burrowing behaviors, aquatic habitats, and dietary flexibility may have been key advantages. Mammals, too, endured this chaos, though their role at the time was insignificant compared to dinosaurs. These survivors carried forward a genetic memory of the Cretaceous, a thin thread of life woven through the darkest years our planet has ever known. The aftermath of the impact was as much about silence as it was about fire. Once the skies darkened and the winds carried smoke across continents, the world entered a state scientists call an impact winter. Temperatures plummeted, not for days or weeks, but for months and possibly years. Even in regions far from ground zero, the nights grew colder and days dimmed to an eerie twilight. Paleoclimate models, supported by evidence from leaf fossils and chemical markers, suggest global average temperatures may have dropped by over 10 degrees Celsius, though how quickly this happened remains debated. The sudden collapse of warmth devastated plants first, and with their loss came cascading extinction across every level of the food web. The fossil record reflects this chain reaction in chilling detail. Layers just above the impact debris show a sudden decline in pollen, replaced by an abundance of fungal spores. This suggests that much of the planet's vegetation died off, replaced temporarily by fungus that thrived on decaying matter. Dinosaurs that depended on flowering plants and conifers had little to eat, and predators that relied on them suffered the same fate. Marine sediments paint a similar picture, with plankton populations almost disappearing in the immediate aftermath. Coral reefs that had existed for tens of millions of years were reduced to barren limestone skeletons. Even mollusks, so resilient throughout Earth's history, show signs of near-total collapse, and yet pockets of resilience persisted. Crocodilians, turtles, and small mammals, creatures with lower metabolic demands or behaviors suited to sheltering, managed to ride out the chaos. Some fish and amphibians also endured, suggesting that ecosystems with access to deep water or underground refuges fared better than those exposed to the harsh surface conditions. Birds, descendants of small theropod dinosaurs, represent one of the most striking survival stories. Their ability to eat seeds and insects, combined with flight, may have given them a crucial advantage. These survivors became the architects of the world to come. The extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs is often portrayed as a single, decisive moment. In reality, the aftermath stretched over thousands of years. The Earth's atmosphere slowly cleared, sunlight returned, and temperatures stabilized, but the biosphere was forever changed. The Mesozoic ecosystems, with their towering sauropods and apex predators like Tyrannosaurus, were replaced by new evolutionary experiments. Mammals began to diversify rapidly, filling niches that had been closed to them for millions of years. Forests regrew, though with different species, and flowering plants spread even further. Recovery was slow, but it was relentless. Evolution had been handed a blank slate, and it began to rewrite life's story. The Chicxulub impact marks one of the clearest dividing lines in Earth's history, a single day that reshaped everything that followed. The fossils and rocks tell us that the dinosaurs' world ended not with a whimper, but with fire, darkness, and ice. Yet from this devastation came opportunity, a reminder that life is as fragile as it is resilient. The age of reptiles closed in catastrophe, but from its ashes, the age of mammals would rise. The asteroids' firestorms, tsunamis, and choking skies did not erase every trace of life. Even at the height of catastrophe, there were survivors. In muddy riverbanks, beneath fallen logs, in underground burrows, life clung on. Small mammals, crocodilians, birds, amphibians, and flowering plants found ways to persist. This is one of evolution's great paradoxes. How could such devastation coexist with resilience? How did so many perish while some creatures endured against all odds? The fossil record suggests it was not sheer luck, but a tapestry of biology, behavior, and circumstance that shaped this divide between extinction and survival. In the immediate aftermath, ecosystems were stripped bare. Global darkness lasted months, possibly years. Photosynthesis slowed to a near halt, starving food webs from the bottom up. Large herbivores had no vegetation to eat, and their predators soon followed them into oblivion. But smaller animals, those with adaptable diets and low energy needs, had a chance. Mammals were no longer confined to the ecological shadows they had lived in for more than 100 million years. They had fur for insulation and could huddle in burrows, perhaps hibernating through the worst conditions. Some species ate insects, seeds, and carrion resources that remained even as plants withered. This flexibility may have been their salvation. Birds, too, tell a similar story of survival. Not all species made it through, but those that did were likely small, ground-dwelling birds capable of eating seeds. Fossilized crops, the storage organs in bird throats, have been found packed with seeds, suggesting they could store food even when greenery vanished. The ability to fly may have helped them travel between isolated patches of habitat, but flight alone was not enough. It was their omnivorous diets and nesting habits that may have tipped the balance. From this handful of survivors came all modern birds, carrying echoes of their dinosaurian lineage. Crocodilians and turtles thrived where other reptiles faltered. Aquatic habitats may have offered a buffer against the chaos on land. While rivers and lakes still experienced chemical changes and a loss of sunlight, they were more stable than scorched forests and barren plains. Crocodilians, cold-blooded and capable of fasting for extended periods, weathered the famine. Turtles, with shells and slow metabolisms, endured as well. Both lineages would remain virtually unchanged for millions of years, living fossils in a world that kept evolving around them. Plants recovered faster than expected. The first evidence of greenery's comeback is found in sediments rich with ferns, a phenomenon paleobotanists call a fern spike. Ferns are opportunists, thriving in disturbed landscapes where other plants cannot. Their spores spread quickly, blanketing hillsides and valleys. Flowering plants soon followed. Their ability to grow rapidly and partnerships with insects helped them reclaim ecosystems. By 10,000 years after the impact, forests were regrowing. Within a million years, flowering plants were dominant again, setting the stage for evolutionary experiments. The resilience of these organisms reshaped the biosphere. Mammals, freed from the shadow of dinosaurs, diversified rapidly. Birds evolved into countless forms, filling ecological roles once held by their ancestors. Crocodilians and turtles became reminders of a world that had vanished. Plants built green corridors that stitched together a broken planet. In the aftermath of devastation, the few surviving species began to shape a new world. Mammals, Once nocturnal scavengers and insect hunters seized opportunities left by the fallen giants. Their evolutionary history had prepared them for this moment. Synapsid ancestors had already developed traits like differentiated teeth and live birth, allowing flexibility in diet and reproduction. Now, with ecosystems vacant, these traits became crucial advantages. Fossil evidence shows that within a few 100,000 years, mammals diversified dramatically, filling niches once dominated by dinosaurs. Some became small arboreal climbers, others dug burrows, and a few began evolving toward larger body sizes. It was the dawn of a new era, carrying genetic echoes of deep time. Birds, too, emerged as a dominant force. Their evolutionary lineage, tied directly to theropod dinosaurs, meant that even in this new world, dinosaurs never fully disappeared. Modern birds are living fossils in one sense, carrying features such as wishbones, air sacs, and feathers perfected during the Mesozoic. Fossils reveal early post-extinction bird species experimenting with new beak shapes and body plans, likely in response to flowering plants and insects. These evolutionary experiments paved the way for the incredible diversity of bird life we see today. In aquatic systems, crocodilians held their ground. Their ability to regulate metabolism and survive extended periods without food meant they weathered the extinction better than most large reptiles. Fossils from this time show little change in their body design, demonstrating how effective their strategies were. Plants may have been the quiet heroes of recovery. The return of ferns and angiosperms rebuilt ecosystems, providing food and shelter for animals reclaiming devastated landscapes. Pollen records show that within decades, plant life was stabilizing, and within centuries, forests had returned in patches. Insects followed, adapting quickly to the renewed abundance of flowers. This tight relationship between plants and insects shaped ecosystems for millions of years to come. Yet survival did not mean safety. The post-impact world was a crucible. Global temperatures fluctuated, carbon levels rose, and ecosystems were unstable. Many species that initially survived ultimately failed to thrive. Extinction bottlenecks continued for hundreds of thousands of years, sculpting life into the resilient forms we recognize today. What survived was not simply life as it had been, but life transformed. These survivors carried scars of the cataclysm, encoded in their genomes and recorded in their bones. The story of survival is as much about loss as it is about endurance. The echoes of that ancient world are all around us, even if we rarely notice them. Birds fill the air with songs that evolved from the vocalizations of their theropod ancestors, while their skeletons still bear hollow bones that once gave dinosaurs an advantage in movement and breathing. Each sparrow and pigeon carries a legacy older than humanity itself, their flight a whisper from the Mesozoic skies. In wetlands and rivers, crocodiles glide silently, their eyes just above the surface. Their lineage predates the extinction and reaches back over 200 million years. They are survivors of a design so efficient that it has needed little change since the Triassic. Even their behavior, with ambush hunting and patience measured in hours, reflects a world once ruled by reptiles of staggering size. Mammals, once constrained to the shadows, spread out and diversified in ways that reshaped the planet. Fossil evidence from early Paleocene deposits shows that within 10 million years of the impact, mammals had evolved into a vast range of forms. Some developed specialized teeth and digestive systems to exploit new plants, while others took to the trees, experimenting with agility and intelligence. A few returned to the water, their descendants eventually becoming whales and dolphins. The evolutionary momentum gained in this period would lead, step by step, to primates and, much later, humans. Every aspect of our biology, from our warm-blooded metabolism to our complex brains, is tied to this moment of devastation and renewal. Flowering plants also transformed the landscape. Their proliferation was not halted by the asteroid but accelerated, their adaptability allowing them to flourish where conifers and cycads struggled. Fossilized pollen records indicate that forests rebounded in mosaic patches across continents, creating pockets of diversity that acted as cradles for new species. Flowering plants became dominant in many ecosystems, fueling the rise of pollinating insects and setting in motion a new kind of ecological complexity. The world became more colourful, fragrant and dynamic, though it would have been unrecognizable to us in its earliest stages of recovery. Even the oceans, which suffered devastating losses, became cradles of innovation. Marine reptiles perished, but fish, sharks, and marine mammals filled their empty niches. Coral reefs, initially destroyed by acidified waters, eventually returned, though their species composition had shifted. The ocean's history of recovery reveals a pattern seen throughout Earth's story. Ecosystems collapse and rebuild, never returning to what they were before. The iridium-rich layer of sediment marking the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary serves as a geological scar. It is found on every continent, a silent witness to a moment when life's trajectory was violently redirected. We often imagine extinction as an absolute ending, but in reality, it is a transformation. The Mesozoic world did not vanish completely. It evolved. Its survivors carried its memory forward in bone, gene, and feather. The birds that soar above us are not simply descendants of dinosaurs, they are dinosaurs adapted for a new age. Crocodiles, turtles, and countless plant species remain as living fossils, connecting us to a world we can only glimpse in stone. Even mammals like us carry the faint imprint of reptilian ancestry in our skeletons. The Earth we inhabit is not separate from the Mesozoic, but a continuation of it, a story rewritten through catastrophe and resilience. With each living creature a chapter that carries echoes of an age that never truly ended. Thank you for walking this winding trail through time with me, fellow Sapien, tracing the echoes of life that survived and the shadows it left behind. If this journey sparked wonder, offered a moment of calm, or lit a new question in your mind, I'm grateful you were here to share it. I wonder which fragment of this story will remain with you long after the screen fades. Ancient feathers drifting on a cooling breeze, flowers blooming in ash-strewn fields, bones whispering in stone. If something stirred in you, leave a word in the comments as a quiet offering, a way of building this circle of minds who wander together. Like, share, or subscribe if you'd like to join me again. For there are always more stories waiting in the deep shadows of time. Until we meet again, stay curious, stay thoughtful,